At Lockheed Martin, we see things differently because our mission means more than just protecting tomorrow. It's about propelling it forward. So we use the power of data to build powerful connections, utilize AI to bring our technology to the fight, and look for answers in places others would never think of. We see things from a different point of view, but our mission is always clear.
Good morning. Could I ask everyone to take their seats, please? Good morning and welcome to Defense Forum Washington. I'm Ray Spicer, CEO and publisher at the Naval Institute. Now that you're all comfortably seated, I'm going to ask you to rise and please join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Again, welcome to all our attendees, both here in person and watching online. I know there's a lot of folks online right now. We're especially grateful for our conference sponsor, Lockheed Martin. Thank you to Vice Admiral retired Tom Roden, Vice President, International Strategy and Business Development at Lockheed Martin, for continued support to the Naval Institute and this conference. And glad that a number of folks from Lockheed Martin are here with us today in the audience. Before we begin, one quick item of housekeeping. Our speakers will allow time for questions, so please use the standing microphones in the aisles so that we may all hear your questions, and so our guests tuning into the live stream of the conference can also follow along. And please do ask questions, and if you do have a question, please try your best to get to the question. We have a really jam-packed schedule of speakers today, great speakers, but limited time, so please just get to the question. Our theme today is building and sustaining the naval force structure the nation needs. The challenges facing the sea services today are numerous. We are tackling issues with operational availability, new construction, while at the same time global demand is very high. Maintenance delays in shipbuilding capacity are stretching us thin amid instability in Ukraine, in Gaza, in the Red Sea, now in Syria, and beyond. Lately, we've seen ships having to extend their deployments some 7, 8, and oftentimes 9 months in order to meet their commitments, which has all kinds of downstream impacts on things ranging from maintenance availabilities, training time, to recruiting and retention. Compounding these issues, we face intense pressure to modernize our shipyards, increase throughput on submarine construction, and support the Marine Corps' amphibious needs, all while grappling with growing competition from China's surge in shipbuilding capacity. The tooth portion of the defense budget has declined the last 3 years in real terms, and we have had to live with inefficient continuing resolutions instead of full-year defense budgets to fund the force. With security challenges around the globe, the Defense Department is at its lowest level of funding in relation to GDP in over 80 years. We are honored to have an esteemed group of speakers from the military, Congress, and academia to provide their assessment on the current state of shipbuilding, including issues such as shipbuilding capacity, maintenance challenges, operational availability, and the challenges shipyards face with labor, training, budgeting, and requirements. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Eric Labs. Dr. Labs is a senior analyst for naval forces and weapons at the Congressional Budget Office. He specializes in issues related to the procurement, budgeting, and sizing of forces for the Department of the Navy. Eric has testified before Congress numerous times and published many reports under the auspices of the Congressional Budget Office, as well as articles and papers in academic journals and conferences, including the U.S. Naval Institute's proceedings, as well as Sea Power Magazine, the Naval War College Review, and Security Studies. So I will now turn it over to Eric to kick off today's conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'll wait for my slides to load up here, but I can start with a couple of remarks that don't rely on the slides. First of all, I want to thank the Naval Institute for inviting me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk before you, and hopefully what I have to say, you will find something of value. These remarks are my own. They do not reflect those of the Congressional Budget Office or the U.S. Congress. And consistent with CBO policy, I will present some options so as to hopefully enrich the discussion, but will not be making any recommendations. So, unfortunately, I'm here to tell you something that many of you already know. The state of naval shipbuilding in the United States today is not good. In fact, it is the worst it has been in nearly the 30 years that I have been CBO's naval analyst. The ships that the Navy buys and the industry that builds them are excellent, but costs are rising across the board and delivery schedules are slipping dramatically. To that point, I will talk briefly about four things: how we got to where we are today, a few words on the Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan, the state of the shipbuilding industrial base now, and what we can do about it. So these are the topics I'm going to address, and then I want to start off with congressional support for shipbuilding, but this slide in particular. Ever since Congress required the Navy to submit a 30-year shipbuilding plan to Congress, it has been much more aspirational than reality. I mean, look at this chart. This is the problem statement, is it not? Most people who look at the geopolitical challenge posed by the People's Republic of China, a totalitarian communist dictatorship, conclude that, among other things, we need a larger Navy. Indeed, a much larger Navy than we currently have, which stands at 295 ships today. But despite shipbuilding plan after shipbuilding plan, advocating, proposing to build a larger fleet, we never seem to get there or even close in any meaningful way. Sure, we are above the nadir of the 2000s, which was 271 ships, but under the current plan, we're going back down to 283 ships in 2026, which doesn't count the prospect of a number of layups of support ships. And that 283 will only be as high as it is because of congressional intervention over the years and the Navy's decision to extend the service life of 3 Ticonderoga-class cruisers in recent days. We've been playing this dance now for more than 13 years, and the music never changes. Why? There are several reasons. For a long time, the challenge to building a larger fleet was budgets. The Navy would lose out on the competition for resources within the Department of Defense as we fought multiple land wars in Asia. Administrations of both parties would request relatively small shipbuilding budgets, and the Congress would appropriate close to those requests. But then, as concern over China rose and the concern over what the replacement of our sea-based strategic deterrent would cost, and thus what it would do to the shipbuilding budgets began to rise. Requests for larger shipbuilding budgets became a feature of the DoD budget starting in 2016, which I might add, was still in the middle of the Budget Control Act era. And the Congress enthusiastically supported increasing shipbuilding by adding substantially to the administration's request, year in and year out, and every year between 2013 and 2024. 2025 remains an open question. The bloom is off the rose a little bit there, but we'll have to see how that plays out. We can talk about that more in the Q&A if you like. So much so has Congress been supportive of shipbuilding that when you look at the past 20 years, the SCN budget grew by nearly twice the rate of shipbuilding inflation and by more than 2.5 times the rate of inflation in the economy as a whole. Now, to be sure, content was being added to the SCN budget too, but it cannot be said that an awful lot of money wasn't being appropriated by the Congress in recognition of the need for a larger fleet over the past 20 years. In 2011, many people were concerned that with a $14 billion SCN budget, a boomer replacement that cost $8 billion would consume over half the budget. Well, we are at $8 billion boomers today, and based on the 2025 FIDIP, they consume about a quarter of the SCN budget that has more than doubled. In my view, the funding challenge of Columbia is largely being met by the Congress. But I want to move now to the Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan. Under the 2025 plan, the Navy would build a larger fleet, faster than under any alternative under the 2024 shipbuilding plan. And this is perhaps not particularly surprising, given the demands that the Navy is facing and the prospect of needing a larger fleet. What is a bit more surprising here is that the Navy gets there by buying more current generation ships and fewer next generation ships than such that the 2025 fleet ends up being less capable by several of the Navy's metrics than the fleets under the 2024 plan. I don't have the metrics here. They will be published they are published in the Navy shipbuilding report, but I'm going to be publishing them in my shipbuilding report in early January. But the fact is, on a number of measures, the capability is less, the ship quantities are more, and costs are higher. Indeed, costs are leading to this larger fleet does lead to sort of a more expensive budget. CBO, as I said, is in a few weeks. We're going to publish the 2025 shipbuilding plan, but the total budget required to implement that plan is, not surprisingly, greater than last year's sort of choose your own adventure shipbuilding plan of the 2024 report. The Navy's total budget would need to grow in real terms, that is removing the effects of inflation, over time from $255 billion today to about $350 billion by 2054. Now let me shift the conversation a little bit to the shipbuilding industrial base. As the money flowed from the Congress for the larger fleet, the aggregate demand signal to industry became quite substantial. And while admittedly on a year-to-year basis it sometimes could look confusing with the presence of continuing resolutions and the like, the demand signal was still larger, and for submarines in particular, it became actually in many ways too much, too fast. That, combined with societal trends that discourage people from seeking employment in heavy industry and the disruptions and accelerations of those trends caused by COVID, budgets became less of a constraint, and challenges in the execution of shipbuilding programs caused costs to rise and now schedules to slip. But that growth was concentrated in carriers, submarines, and logistics and support ships. Amphibious warfare ships really had the opposite problem, with a weak demand signal from the Navy and repeated congressional interventions to first boost amphibious ship production, and then to set the requirement for those ships into law. The Secretary of the Navy released the results of his 45-day shipbuilding review this past April, which shined a very bright light on these issues. But ship construction delays were baked in well before that. The 2025 shipbuilding plan will now take those challenges and extend them to a higher level. Let me just stop for a moment and briefly explain how I do this slide. The way I do this slide is that I use light ship displacement and condition A1 weight for submarines and divide that with the time span. So a 10,000-ton ship that takes 5 years to build gets 2,000 tons in each of the year that this chart indicates. So the aggregate shipbuilding tonnage for the Navy's combat ships will increase by over 40% compared to today, which would then come on top of nearly a 70% increase since 2014. However, this coming growth will be concentrated in combat ships. As the chart shows, logistics and support ships will face a different problem, with a potential boom and bust cycle actually coming over the next 20 years. I want to zero in now a little bit on the submarine industrial base. After suffering the most acute and painful challenge of any sector in shipbuilding over the past half-dozen years, it is going to face the same challenge yet again, despite the current problems are still being unresolved. Between 2009 and 2024, the amount of submarine tonnage under construction nearly tripled, with Columbia being the Navy's #1 acquisition priority, and therefore gets the first claim on the best workers and the most skilled workers, the best and most skilled managers, as well as parts and materials. The result is construction times for attack submarines are growing substantially. In the Navy's 2025 budget documents, SSNs are projected to take 8, 9, and some as many as 10 years to build. And I suspect the 2026 budget documents will likely show further deterioration in some of those construction schedules. The 2025 shipbuilding plan, this is without AUKUS, would result in roughly a 75% increase in demand for submarine tonnage by the early 2030s, and it will compared to today. And it will stay in that range for the better part of a decade. Only once we get past Columbia, if we get past Columbia, does that demand on the submarine industrial base begin to ease. And I say if because we don't actually know in the future how many boomers the Navy will actually require compared to what it is currently planning for. Now, if you introduce AUKUS into the equation, where you build 5 replacement submarines in 2030s and 2040s, then that is going to add to that burden, with the higher portion of it being extended a little bit little bit further and a little bit longer. And my assumption in this chart is that the replacements for AUKUS are Virginia-class submarines. If they turn out to be SSNXs, the next generation submarines, then the burden is actually going to be higher because that is going to be very much likely a larger submarine. The sum result of all of this is that we find ourselves, unfortunately, with a smaller fleet than what anyone had ever intended. The difficulty in hiring and retaining shipyard workers, naval architects, and engineers in the entirety of the naval enterprise, as well as the growth in the demand for naval construction, has led to the executability challenges pretty much across the board. As naval ship construction executability has declined, the fleet did not grow as anticipated and actually became and will become smaller. To be sure, more and more ships being retired before the end of their service lives also contributed to that problem, but the gap that we are seeing here is driven in large measure by the decline in, by the scheduled ships as a result of the decline of executability. Between 2020 and 2040, the gap between the fleet that the Navy would have had and the actual and currently projected fleet is 231 ship years. Between 2027 and 2030 in particular, the gap is actually about 20 ships in each of those years compared to what it could have been, most of which are submarines and destroyers that are not there, which are critical platforms in any potential confrontation with China. And now we are in a vicious cycle. Executability is challenging, and that is leading to more schedule slips, more man hours, and thus more costs. Indeed, costs are now rising substantially, in some cases dramatically and shockingly. In the 2024 FYDP, the Navy reported $3.4 billion in cost overruns or cost to complete bills. In the 2025 FYDP, comparing the same years and the same ships as the 2024 FYDP, that figure has now grown to over $10 billion. I'm including in that money the money the Navy needs to fully fund the 2024 and 2025 attack submarines, as well as the $1.7 billion for DDG-51s that the Navy has characterized as subsequent full-year funding, which is just cost overruns by another name. And we're still not done. That amount does not yet count for the substantial shortfalls in submarines in fiscal year 2026 and beyond that you may have read about in press report in recent weeks. My remarks today are limited to just the numbers that are already in official government documents. The question is now, what can we do about it? How can we sort of start doing what the CNO says she wants to do, which is to get more players on the field? The question that comes up, and that is the question that is confronting us all right now. Last year, speaking in this same spot, my colleague at CRS, Ron O'Rourke, offered a well-developed argument about how the Navy and industry need to rethink how to design, build, and maintain and cruise ships. He emphasized, in particular, the need for the Navy to engage in upfront, end-to-end design of what I call the naval enterprise, and to think about how that design will fit into American society, workforce, and industrial base that we have, not the one we wish we had. If you haven't seen his argumentation on the topic, I commend it to you. But a challenge of Ron's approach, and he would be the first to tell you this, is that it is the long game, and it will take decades to fully implement. Here I will ask, what can be done in the near term in light of the issues I have outlined to get to a larger fleet and a better functioning industrial base? There are several options that the Navy can consider to get, in the words of the CNO, more players in the field. One is the Navy sort of diversifies its shipbuilding program towards a small, for example, a small missile corvette is one option. This is not an option that's unique with me. I've talked about it several times in several reports over the years, but many other analysts in town have as well. Rather than going down the LUSV path, the Navy could go down a path where it does this manned corvette, and perhaps when the technology matures, it could pursue an optionally unmanned platform in a way that is more the adjunct magazine that the Navy hopes for. But in the meantime, a small, well-armed missile corvette could provide a lot more capability to the Navy over a broader distributed firepower that it seeks to have. Now, the pros of that are sort of what I just explained in terms of naval shipbuilding, and they would be relatively less expensive to build than anything the Navy is currently building. Not that they would be cheap, but they would be less than a frigate and they would be less than a destroyer. But that's going to still require some time. You're going to have to design the ship. Smaller yards are going to have a steep learning curve to get up to learn how to build those ships. So it's not a cure-all, but it is an opportunity for the naval enterprise to diversify its portfolio, if you will. A second concept that various people have talked about is the idea of retrofitting VLS cells onto other existing Navy ships. The LPD-17 was designed to accommodate 16 VLS cells. They could be retrofitted to incorporate them, and they could canisterize and put VLS, put canisterized missiles on logistics and support ships. Some people have used the expression arm everything you can. The idea is to get as distributed a fleet with as much firepower as you can possibly do with the assets that you have. That too is something that can be done in a relatively short period of time compared to the time required to build a destroyer, which is now in the range of 7 years, or a submarine, which is in the range of 9 years. And last, as some people have proposed in the past, you could buy small merchant ships and you could equip them with canisterized missiles, or if you want to spend a little bit more money, you could put VLS cells in those ships. Those have disadvantages too. The Navy would have to crew those ships. Those could not be run by civilian mariners. They would certainly not have much in the way of a self-defense capability or any sort of ability to resist any potential attack that might come to them. But nonetheless, if you were looking for a relatively fast, a relatively inexpensive way to put a lot more platforms at sea that carry anti-ship missiles and other functions that can serve for a conflict with China, then that might be another option that the Navy could consider. This is my last substantive slide. And the other issue, of course, is what do you do about this shipbuilding industrial base? Over the past 3 years, I can say that I've been fortunate that CBO has sent me to visit many of the private and public yards that the Navy uses to perform their work, the new construction work and to perform their maintenance work in the continental United States. I have not yet been able to convince them to send me to Hawaii, but there's hope for the future. In my view, the challenges facing the Navy shipyards are mostly, but not entirely, but mostly about getting more workers in them and keeping them when they have them. And how can we do that? These are 4 items that need to be discussed in more detail and more broadly. We are moving in that direction to already do so, but we need to increase wages and benefits in the shipyards. You want to be able to improve working conditions for them. You want to increase the supply of workers. As it turns out today that anybody working on a U.S. Navy shipbuilding program has to have citizenship status. They must be U.S. citizens. There may be basis for relaxing that rule a little bit for green card holders or what have you, to get more workers into the yards. Another would be to increase the advertising and outreach to workers so that you can get more people from different parts of the country that are interested in working in shipyards. Right now we have a situation where the attrition in many of the shipyards is in 20 to 22% for your average worker. And some of the critical trades, it's as high as 30% or more. There is no way to improve the condition of the shipbuilding industrial base with attrition rates that high. You're not going to get the skills that you're going to need. You're not going to get the improvement in your work. You're not going to get, therefore, then costs and labor hours to come down without that. Improving the working conditions is something that can occur literally when I was riding around the New England area, and we'd drive past a sign that said, this was 2 to 3 years ago. You've heard these stories, but it's true. Subway was advertising $18 an hour plus benefits. The shipyard, the adjacent shipyards at that time were offering $21 an hour to sort of entry-level workers. If you've got a choice between working inside a Subway versus working out in the hot and the cold of a shipyard, if you're 18, 19, or 20 years old, coming out of a trade school or maybe or a 2-year community college program, and you're not necessarily thinking about a long-term career and what might get you sort of advancement over time, that can look pretty compelling to work in the more comfortable environment. And that is something, to the extent that we can invest in the shipyards to do that, to cover more stuff, move more stuff inside, to improve those working conditions, but especially to raise pay in a very substantial way, to compensate for the fact that working conditions in those yards are worse than almost any other manufacturing sector you can think of. That is something that we need to do, it seems to me. Ron and I have been discussing the need for these kinds of solutions for some time. His report on Navy shipbuilding includes short write-ups on these options, as well as a number of others that can be considered in the near term. I'm personally convinced that the Navy and industry will never overcome the challenges that they are in without at least some, if not all, of the ones that I've listed here. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I hope you find this of value, and I'm happy to look forward to and talk about any questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
Ben Massingill with the Stimson Center. Sir, your third COA for trying to increase the size of the fighting force of the Navy involves trying to get merchant ships and arming those. Has there any been analysis to see, given the limited size of the ocean-going U.S. merchant marine, that even these private civilian yards could even produce numbers that would make any dent in our need for ships? Has there been analysis on that?
I have not done any analysis on that. This was the first I read of this proposal was some years ago in Proceedings magazine, where this was an idea, and this would be a sort of smaller merchant ships. It wouldn't be sort of the larger ones you need, for example, in the Ready Reserve Fleet, because you don't obviously want to put hundreds of missiles on one of these types of platforms. You want to just put a relatively smaller number of that. I don't know what the current condition is of the availability of smaller used merchant ships out there. So that would be something that would obviously have to be taken into consideration and to make that work effectively. But even if you're only talking about 10 or 20 ships, that puts a much higher degree of diversity on the anti-ship missile force that the United States Navy could put to sea in the Pacific as a result of that. More distributed firepower, if that's the name of the game, I'm willing to look for any option that might contribute to that process.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Dr. Lobbs. Don Klein from Thayer Mahan. I'm a naval aviator asking you a shipbuilding question. So, looking at the location of some of our shipyards, they're not exactly in the most robust hiring areas with access to trained personnel. Pascagoula has a finite number of workers. Marinette certainly is in not a very populated area. Have we given any consideration to modular construction, much like Columbia, where portions of Columbia are being built in Newport and then sent to Electric Boat for final assembly? If we took that model and extrapolated it out to other platforms, you might have access to more robust labor markets than you do based on the current location of traditional shipyards. Yeah. Thanks.
No, I quite agree with that. That is one of the other options that Ron has talked about a lot in his report and some of his remarks as well, and that is something that certainly the submarine industry is doing in a rather substantial proportion. If you look at sort of the labor hours that are kind of needed to perform the workload that they have for them, they're going to outsource as much as 50% more in terms of labor hours if they went to places like Austell, which is one of the big focus factories for that. So to the extent that that is something, I kind of take that as a given now, as something that the Navy is pursuing actively and aggressively. Can you expand that, or should you expand that to other shipbuilding programs? Sure, to the extent that the opportunities are available and the priorities are met accordingly. There's no reason why you can't do that for any other kind of shipbuilding program. The issue, of course, becomes it's not the ideal way to build a ship. I mean, obviously, when you talk to the yards, there have been challenges in doing this kind of approach, but we're at that point in time where they don't really have any choice, because as you say, the labor markets are not there where the yards are, so they're going to have to find labor in other sources where the labor is available, and to do exactly to say modular construction. Ron's had some good talks about that, where he explains, we've done it in the past with LPD-17 after Katrina. We're doing it a lot for submarines now, and we're only going to do that more and more in the future. So yes. Mark? Oh, I'm sorry. Please.
Hi, Rebecca Ganska with SMI. In terms of your second COA, which was essentially build smaller ships or build ships a little cheaper until we find a more refined ship to build, in terms of that option, we saw the Marine Corps with the landing ship medium attempt to do that exact thing with building a cheap ship that we can get out fast and get the Marines on it. That kind of fell through this meandering role in the building that kind of led to no solution. So from your perspective, how do you prevent that from occurring again? Is that a congressional directed thing? Is that a CAPE/the building problem? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very good question. And the medium landing ship is a program I had to write the Congress asked me to write a specific report on that back in the spring. And that was definitely an example of where it seems like from what I can see from the outside, and no inside baseball here, is that the Marines had sort of one vision of that program, and the Navy then seemed to have a different vision for that program. And we're at a point where one vision seems to be more like the Navy's, but the costs associated with them seem to be more like what the Marine Corps had in mind, and those are not exactly compatible with each other. I think, for one thing, that the concept, one of the issues behind the LSM program was the Marine Corps' operating concept behind it. There was questions in the Hill, there was questions in DOD as to sort of how effective that would be. But to your point about building a smaller ship and how do we prevent it from going down that same sort of path, is that I think that leadership's got to come both from DOD and from Capitol Hill. In other words, if you want to build a small combatant, first thing you have to do is you're going to have some sort of configuration control. You have to accept the fact that it can't be all things to all people. It can't do all the missions that a large destroyer or even a large frigate can do, because what we're building is a large multi-mission frigate. The idea behind this is much more, dare I say it, the original concept behind LCS, which is sort of a focused mission ship, but a focused mission that is primarily there to provide additional magazine and missile capacity to the Navy, and not necessarily do a whole lot else. If you don't have the discipline that comes from inside the building to do that, then you're right, then that program could just as easily fall by the wayside the way other programs have in the past. But at the same time, to get a larger, more distributed fleet, I don't see how you do that without some sort of smaller missile combatant to do that, to get you there.
Thanks. Dr. Labs. Mark Vandroff from Fincantieri Marinette Marine. I'm going to ask a question with some risk here that you will ask it back at me during my panel.
I plan to stay for your panel.
For the different options for workforce, one that I didn't see, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, or if you've looked at it, is to what degree can more shipyard work that's currently being done by a human being be automated in the future?
Well, I am definitely not an expert to be able to tell you that, other than to agree that in general principle that the more automation that we can do, basically the application of any technology to ship construction that allows you to reduce the quantity of labor hours that you need to build any given ship can only work to the good. So to the extent that we can learn from other shipyards, our friends and allies, and to apply that into U.S. shipyards, we certainly should do that, because the serious constraint of where we are in the shipbuilding industrial base is labor, in my view. So anything that we can do to alleviate that pressure from every angle that you can think of, I agree with that. I didn't include it in this talk, not because I don't think it's important, but just because I didn't want to sort of go through a list of 10 or 15 things. I wanted to sort of focus on ones that I think matter the most and can have the most remedial, immediate effect. And there are a few that I think can meet that category better than wage increases for the shipyard workers. I mean, that's going to come with a penalty, of course. That means your ships are going to be more expensive, at least as you transition to get those more experienced workers. And then hopefully over time, the number of labor hours that you need to build the ship therefore will come down as those workers are more experienced, even if they're more highly paid. But that's going to be, a challenging transition. But we don't dig ourselves out of 10-year submarine builds or 7- or 8-year destroyer builds without doing something to those effects.
Eric, good morning. Gregory Glaros. Could you touch on the value or the benefit of the $2.4 billion award to Deloitte for effectively studying how to hire more shipbuilders? And should that be offered as a sacrificial lamb to the Department of Government Efficiencies?
That's not a loaded question. There's not a lot I can, in my position, that I can sort of comment on that. I mean, the one thing I will observe is that, as I understand the value of that contract, it is mostly a pass-through exercise, in the sense that the Navy has contracted with, and if there's anybody in this room who knows this better than I, feel free to answer it. It is a pass-through exercise where the Deloitte is kind of managing, for a fee, of course, a lot of investments in the submarine industrial base. So it's not like we're going to pay Deloitte $2.4 billion and they are going to produce themselves $2.4 billion worth of products or goods for the submarine industrial base. It is more that they are acting as the Navy's agent, if you will, for a whole range of activities. Are they the best company for that, or should somebody else be doing it? Should the Navy be doing it? I don't have answers to those questions because honestly, I'm really just not in a position to comment further. Bill.
Eric, yeah, Bill Hamlet, Naval Institute Proceedings. Every senior officer that I hear speak always mentions, allies and partners as an American superpower, right? Our allies and partners, we do everything by, with, and through allies and partners. There's been conversations, and SecNav has talked about this, about building ships or having allies and partners perhaps build some hulls for the United States Navy. There's pushback in Congress on that. You mentioned in your brief the idea of a DDC or a small missile combatant. Several of our allies and partners build really beautiful ones, right? Very capable small missile combatants. What are your thoughts on the possibility that one of the future COAs that gets us out of this gap is actually buying foreign ships or being able to speed up the ability to buy a foreign design and build it here in the United States?
Well, I'll start off with saying my idea behind a DDC, and you're right, that's exactly what I had in mind, was that there were other smaller yards in the United States that could actually build those that would not contribute to the burdens of the existing shipyards. So my thought was sort of, there are other shipyards that can build small combatants like that. It's going to take them some time to learn how to do it, but we could diversify the shipbuilding portfolio if the demand signal is going to remain as large as it is for the foreseeable future. And you're not wrong in everything you said about many of our friends and allies. They produce some very, pretty nice, missile corvettes and like that. I'm going to defer to the Congress. The Congress has a very, strong view on this issue, and certainly to do that would require a change in the law, because right now it is prohibited by law to buy, foreign ships like that from overseas, regardless of how close a friend and ally that we have. Whether we find ourselves down the road that more options need to be on the table than that are already there, that sort of remains to be seen. But I'm going to defer to the Congress and their judgment on that.
Hi, Sam Legrone, USA News. We're talking a lot about the shipyard workers that need to, build and new construction. I'm curious as to how much of your analysis deals with the labor force that does repair and maintenance, and then additionally, if we're talking about, the congressional language is 355 ships. That's a lot of new sailors that are part of that, too, that are just a tremendous expense. Is that part of kind of the consideration of what y'all are looking at, or just mostly the tonnage?
So most of the work that I do for CBO does focus on the new construction side of things. I do have a colleague who does more analytic work than I do on the maintenance side of the equation. He's done some work on submarines. I contribute to his analysis, but he's very much the lead in that, and he's got one on the surface ship maintenance that is in draft form right now. So I don't do as much with the maintenance side as perhaps I wish I could because of the limitations on time. In terms of the actually, Sam, what was the second part of your question on that?
Just the manpower that you would need.
Power issue. So we'll take it back to Mark's comment about technology. There's another place where technology should be incorporated into new construction Navy ships, whereby to the extent that you can reduce crew sizes on ships in a sensible and a safe way. We've tried this in the past in ways that maybe did not make sense, but as technology moves forward, we should be looking to sort of reduce crew sizes. They were able to successfully do it on the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the Ford. The DDG-1000 has a substantially smaller crew size than the DDG-51. So to the extent that we can continue to incorporate technology in that to reduce the number of sailors required for the fleet, again, that's going to be good, because truly, as the statement is true, that manpower is the most precious resource. That's true in the shipyards, and that's true for the sailors, because you need the crew, you need the sailors to be able to crew these ships that the Navy wants to build in much larger numbers. So anything that can be done in that direction, I think, is something that ought to be actively pursued.
Hi, Sully, old guy. Focusing on small missile-armed corvettes, et cetera. So our history is we decommissioned all of PG-84 Asheville class early. The PCs were ready to go out at the start of the War on Terror, and we hung around. We had 6 hydrofoil PHMs that had they had harpoons on them and a 76 millimeter gun. They were pretty up armored. We have failed to up armor both classes of LCS. So what's the rationale for, hey, if we really want a distributed fleet with missiles, how is our Navy going to accept the latest iteration of where we have a history of, shutting down those classes early in the past?
I guess I would answer that in 2 ways. One is the kind of missile corvette I have in mind is not the same thing as a PC or a hydrofoil. It is certainly, it's an ocean-going ship that would be somewhere in the 3,000 to 4,000 ton range and carry anywhere from 16 to 32 VLS cells. I mean, if you think about what the LUSV, which press reports indicate that we're not sure how well that's succeeding, it will succeed in the next budget go-around. But if you think of the LUSV, which was going to be approximately a 2,000-ton platform with 32 VLS cells, if you make that a little bit larger to accommodate the hotel services that would be required for a crew, it starts to look like a real Navy ship, in my opinion. So that's one thing I would say. The second thing I would say to that is that look at the state of the current programs right now. We've got 10,000-ton destroyers. We've had a frigate program because that has grown by 500 tons, so much so that the lead frigate is going to weigh almost as much as the first Arleigh Burke did in 1985. And it's classified as a small combatant.
Right.
It's not a small combatant. I'm looking to find a way to build actual goodness small combatants that can be built in much larger numbers, buy more yards and more people, so that we're not locked in with only 7 shipyards that are currently building at their capacity. Will that require some degree of culture change on the part of the Navy? I guess so, because of the resistance to small combatants in the past, but that culture change should not be so huge because it's not a hydrofoil.
Right, okay, so if I could follow up, if that's all right. So typically, this kind of a ship has short legs, right? So you're going to want to forward deploy it, which implies tenders or forward basing, et cetera. And it's not an Aegis ship. So I have to get the mentality of, okay, it's a less capable surface combatant, and I just don't know how, if I build 2 of them, geez, I could probably buy another frigate. So the trade-off between a more capable warship and something that's less, that's the hard trade-off that we got to make. And I just challenge, and by the way, I'm a fan of this. I did my thesis in small combatants, but
right.
I just don't know how we get over the culture that we've got today.
I'm not disagreeing with the challenges that would be behind that. At the same time, as I look around and I think about solutions, I think this is one that needs to be, it is certainly an option that should be actively considered and analyzed in more detail than I think that we have so far. I always felt like with the LUSV that we should have gone down a path where it was sort of, at best, optionally unmanned, whereas you design the ship with a crew and then and start building it, and then as technology evolves and you can get more automated automation in that ship, so that maybe in some flight down the road after 5 or 10 ships or whatever number it might be, you can get at least an optionally unmanned function out of it, or even ultimately one day a completely unmanned function. But the other advantage to a small combatant that an unmanned platform does not have is that you can use it for a lot of other things. The adjunct magazine's important, it's valuable, but it's only going to do that one mission. It's not like you're using LUSVs to make port calls or engagement with allies or any potential maritime interception operation. And I don't want to load too many missions on that ship. But still, you can do some other things with that in a way that you can't do with an unmanned ship.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Ken Perry, violating Rule 1, never follow. Sully Sullivan. And your horizon of shipbuilding gap between shipbuilding plans and actual, we're well into what's been called the Davidson window,
yes,
as you know, forecasting the potential or predicting the potential for China invasion of Taiwan by 2027. If all of your good ideas and options were adopted this week, when might they deliver meaningful increase in distributed lethality and numbers of platforms?
Well, if you're talking about the missile corvette, that would not come in my view, that would not come within the Davidson window in the 2027 timeframe. It would come sometime after that. I would think that even if you adopted that one right now, you would take at least 5 years, if not a little bit more, before you could get the first one out there. But the idea being that, you know, once you go down that path, you could start maybe producing those in significantly larger numbers by the early 2030s. I do think you do have some potential within the Davidson window timeframe, say that's 2027 or 2028 timeframe for missile merchants. Now, to be sure, we have challenges in the munitions industrial base too. So there's no point in building ships if you don't have the munitions to put in them. So there is that component as well. But you can certainly do missile merchants within a year or two. You could do some retrofitting of the amphibious and logistics ships, I think, within a 2-year time period as ships come in. But that your fastest one is going to be the missile merchants. The second fastest will be retrofitting existing ships that don't have missiles. Bolting on canisterized missiles onto some of these platforms would not be that hard to do. It just would be a question of the Navy being able to schedule them within the other demands that are on those ships already. But the missile corvette, that's going to take a little bit of time. But I think it's worth the potential of looking at in more detail for down the road, because there was an interesting analysis that I read just the other day about whether, given how much Xi is involved in purging what he views as corruption within his military establishment, whether he really will be in a position to consider the 2027 as a viable option or not. It's not like he said he's going to war in 2027. Yep. He just wants to have it as an option. And he might not actually have that option given the challenge that he is currently facing within his own military organization. So, thank you. Bill, thank you very much.
Eric, I always feel like I'm looking at a problem without my glasses on, and then when Eric talks, it's like I've put my glasses on and things become much more clear. Eric, thank you for your time today. On behalf of the Naval Institute and our audience, we'd like to give you a copy of The Neptune Factor, a book by Nicholas Lambert, published by the Naval Institute Press, Alfred Thayer Mahan, and The Concept of Sea Power. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro. 1983 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Secretary Del Toro served a 22-year career as a surface warrior, including command at sea of USS Bulkley, DDG-84. He served ashore as Senior Executive Assistant to the Director of Program Analysis and Evaluation in OSD. He also served as Special Assistant to the Director and Deputy Director of OMB, where he helped manage budgets for the DoD, the State Department, CIA, DIA, the NRO, and the Peace Corps. Post-active duty, he founded SBG Technology, providing solutions and analysis for issues ranging from shipbuilding to space systems, cybersecurity, health, and training. In addition to his electrical engineering degree from the Naval Academy, he holds master's degrees in national security studies from the Naval War College, space systems engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School, and legislative affairs from George Washington University. And I challenge you to find anyone more dedicated to, committed to a strong Navy and Marine Corps and the people who serve in the Navy and Marine Corps than Secretary Del Toro. Let's give a warm welcome to the 78th Secretary of the Navy, the Honorable Carlos Del Toro.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? This beautiful day in Washington, D.C., huh? Every day is a beautiful day in Washington, D.C. when you're the Secretary of the Navy. Can't think of a better job in government. It's wonderful to be here with all of you this morning to discuss the future of our maritime services. And thank you, Ray, for your leadership in our Navy and for now your leadership here at USNI. Can't think of a better person to lead this effort. To all our flag officers, general officers, distinguished guests, Navy and Marine Corps leaders, and those from USNI, thank you for joining us for this conference and discussion today, and especially for my dear friends at OMB. I still have, I think, approximately 39, 40 days. I don't know exactly what the count is. I'll take any money that you have left over, and to our Navy Marine Corps. And of course, I can't think of any better time to discuss building and sustaining the naval force structure the nation needs than here and now. It is imperative that we maintain a formidable Navy and Marine Corps to secure our nation and advance our national security interests as well as our economic security interests. And if there's everything I've lived by these past 3.5 years, is that notion that national security and economic security are intrinsically tied together. As Secretary of the Navy, you see, my mission has been to provide combat-ready forces and capabilities to our commanders in support of the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. And this means ensuring that our sailors and Marines have the ships, the aircraft, the weapons that they need to deter our adversaries and, if called upon, win decisively our nation's wars. And one of my primary responsibilities has been the professional military education of our Navy and Marine Corps. As I've told my generals and admirals thousands of times in the time that I've been Secretary, it's important to be able to think strategically about these issues. And that's why I have actually endorsed and supported financially our professional military education institutions the way that I have. Because I need everyone in the United States Navy and Marine Corps, from the most senior Navy Admiral or Marine Corps General down to the lowest sailor and Marine, to be able to think strategically. Now, over a year ago at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, I introduced my vision for a new maritime statecraft to prevail in an era of intense strategic competition. And I must say that a year later, I am most pleased by how it has been embraced by so many across the interagency and in Congress in such a bipartisan manner. Maritime statecraft encompasses not only naval diplomacy and maritime competition, but a national whole-of-government effort to build, rebuild comprehensive U.S. and allied maritime power, both commercial and naval. And a key tenet of maritime statecraft is the recognition that no great naval power has long endured without also being a great commercial maritime power. And this is why I have been working across the lifelines of the Department of the Navy, meeting with cabinet leaders across the administration to build awareness and advocate that long-term solutions to many of the Navy's challenges require that we renew the health of our nation's broader maritime industrial base that has been diminishing since about 1980, when we stopped subsidizing commercial shipbuilding in this country. Last year, I drove the creation of a government shipbuilders council. This united the Department of the Navy, MARAD, Coast Guard, NOAA, and yes, even the United States Army. I had to admit that the Army has ships, yes, or boats as I call them, to tackle these common challenges in ship construction and maintenance. We have catalyzed multiple White House-led interagency processes on both naval and commercial shipbuilding, bringing together the National Security Council, the National Economic Councils, and departments across the executive branch. And my team has worked diligently alongside our partners in Congress to reinvigorate existing but unfunded authorities and craft new incentives to build and flag commercial ships in the United States. We have some of these authorities already in statute, on the books. We need to revitalize them, and we need Congress to step in and actually put money towards them. We expect that these efforts will offer significant returns to Navy shipbuilding and sea lift. Maritime statecraft is a means, and maritime dominance is actually the ends. This past August marked my 3rd anniversary as Secretary of the Navy, and it has been the honor of my life to serve alongside the nearly 1 million sailors, Marines, Department of the Navy civilians who serve our great nation and our Navy Marine Corps team. When I entered office, I laid out my vision for the Department of the Navy through 3 enduring priorities. Those are strengthening maritime dominance, building a culture of warfighting excellence, and a real commitment to enhancing our strategic partnerships with all of our stakeholders. These priorities serve as the basis for all that we have done and all that we currently do in the department. To decisively win our nation's war, we cannot rely merely on maintaining our sea power, of course. We must strengthen our maritime dominance by expanding our shipbuilding capacity and enhancing our fleet's capabilities. This has been the focus since my first day as Secretary. As we gather here today, we have approximately 86 ships that are under contract and over 50 in construction, including Ford-class aircraft carriers, Constellation-class frigates, San Antonio-class LPDs, Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers, Columbia-class SSBNs, and Virginia-class SSNs. What we have done in the past 4 years to modernize our Navy and to get shipbuilding back on track is extraordinary. And don't let anybody tell you differently, not anybody in Congress or anywhere else. If we had more resources, of course we could do more. But I assure you that we have maximized the return on investment for the American taxpayer over the last 4 years, making the most wisest decisions, and also correcting the mistakes of the past that have been made on certain shipbuilding classes as well, turning them really lethal today. And I'll talk more about that here in a moment. Last year, we commissioned the USS Jack Lucas, DDG-125, the Navy's first Flight 3 Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyer. Hell, you might as well call it a cruiser. And this year, the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, returned from a historic 8-month deployment to the Mediterranean, where she played a crucial role in deterring further escalation following the outbreak of conflict in Israel. Our ships are making a difference around the globe every single day. Today, a third of our fleet is underway, over 40,000 Marines deployed to every corner of the globe. And a significant milestone, the USS Zumwalt, which I just visited just last week, DDG-1000, has recently been undocked back in the water, and it received the conventional prompt strike upgrade, enhancing its combat capabilities. And today, the literal combat ship is equipped, numerous of them, with the Naval Strike Missile, a long-range precision strike weapon, and eventually many will receive the Mark 70 payload delivery system with vertical launch system technology, giving us tremendous firepower and even more tactical advantage over our adversaries. Yes, LCS is back, Freedom Class and Independence Class, and we have every intent to deploy them aggressively everywhere around the globe. In the Persian Gulf, obviously with the minesweeping capability, and everywhere else it's needed, particularly in the Pacific, with these added capabilities. In September, the Navy awarded contracts for procurement of 1 America-class amphibious assault ship, LHA, and 3 San Antonio amphibious transport dock LPD ships. And I am so proud of that block buy. It's what our Marine Corps needed in order to be effective in the future, to be able to transport large numbers of Marines across the Pacific and anywhere else around the globe. When people ask me about challenges to the amphibious fleet, it's a very simple answer. The ships are old. They need to be replaced. And that's what we, this administration, has done here with this block buy. It's us who actually put this into the POM, and it's this administration that had it approved at the White House and got it over to the Congress, and we are thankful for the monies that the Congress has applied in order for us to be able to go down this route. In addition to our amphibious ship procurement, the Department of the Navy awarded a block buy contract to procure 8 TAO ships that are critically essential to doing logistics in the Pacific and around the globe. And this multi-billion-dollar contract reflects the innovation to build and sustain our maritime dominance and allows for critical investment and maintenance of our shipbuilding industrial base. And we are also focusing significant attention on innovations that will make our current fleet more lethal and provide even a greater return on investment to the American taxpayer. In October, off the coast of San Diego, and yes, I was there, I don't miss a chance to get underway. We tested the Transportable Rearming Mechanism, TRAM, which will provide our surface combatants with the game-changing capability to reload their vertical launch systems while underway in open ocean. And it's critical, obviously. Given the operations that we've conducted in the Red Sea over the past year and a half, we simply cannot afford to have our destroyers sailing for an additional week or 2 weeks to get back in port to reload these VLS launchers. To maintain the United States' position as the world's preeminent maritime power, we're continuously innovating and implementing cutting-edge technologies across the Department of the Navy and the Department of the Marine Corps. Our people are the foundational strength of this department, however, and they provide us competitive wartime advantage over our adversaries. And I've often said that the difference between us and our adversaries is our people. Because we train, again, going back to professional military education, we train and educate our people to think how to fight, to think about how to win. They script their people to fight. And that is the fundamental difference between us and them. Our priority of building a culture of warfighting excellence is founded on strong leadership that is rooted in treating each other with dignity and respect in all that we do, creating an environment in which our sailors, Marines, DoD civilians, and contractors can realize their inherent potential to serve in the United States military and to serve their nation. And this includes promoting programs which improve quality of life and quality of service for all service members, civilians, and their families. Since I took office as Secretary of the Navy, we have decreased the wait list for child development centers by 61% and continue to make strides in reducing CDC wait lists that are so important to our families and their quality of life and quality of service. And just last year, we expanded our parental leave policy, which extended parental leave to 12 weeks for both parents following childbirth or adoption. Since 2021, basic allowance for housing rates have increased, with a 5.4% increase this past year alone. And I'm proud that both the Navy and Marine Corps exceeded their ambitious recruiting goals in fiscal year 24. Folks, the Navy contracted nearly 41,000 new recruits by the end of the fiscal year, and the Marine Corps far exceeded its goal of enlisting over 27,500 new Marines. It has been all hands on deck, and I'm proud of the accomplishments of all our recruiters in both the Navy and Marine Corps for meeting their goals. And we did not reduce those goals. In fact, we have not reduced our goals for the past 3 years. We've upped them every single year because we have to recruit these individuals to close the gaps that we have at sea. So we have remained committed and we have succeeded. We did so without lowering the targeted objectives, as I just said. And where we have struggled, we have worked to identify and address the root causes of our challenges. I'm proud of what we've done. Today, in the Navy, in the Marine Corps, we have the highest retention that we have had in 10 years. These are facts, folks. Look them up. Do your research. These are facts. It's not anecdotal. It's not words on a PowerPoint presentation. It has been a tremendous accomplishment, not something I've done, something our entire team has done. All of our sailors, all of our Marines, our flag officers in both services, and in fact, across the entire military. And again, I'm proud of the support that we received from the Office of Management and Budget in the White House in supporting us financially with these initiatives. Because I often say that talk is cheap in Washington, D.C. It's easy to say anything when the cameras are on you, but the only thing that really matters is what's in the budget. Because the budget is a reflection of our core values and what we believe in and what we do to sustain and support our Marines and sailors on the ground. They know the difference between talk and action. Now, this fall, I approved a plan to restore the health of the Military Sea Lift Command workforce, which includes crew reassignment to higher priority vessels and the placement of some MSC logistics support ships into extended maintenance periods. Our civil service Marines provide vital logistics support to our deployed naval forces. This initiative will not only resolve current operational logistics challenges, but also secure MSC's future workforce by implementing policies, programs, and incentives to attract and retain top-tier talent. By taking these steps, we're investing in the future of our Navy Marine Corps and ensuring our ability to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And there's still a lot more work to be done when it comes to supporting the MSC fleet. And I look forward, hopefully, to some legislative proposals that will develop over the course of the next year to continue to reinforce our MSC fleet, which suffered tremendously during COVID. So many people retired from the MSC fleet during COVID because of the challenges that they faced with deployments 11, 12 months away from their families at a time. We need to restore that. Now, let me talk about enhancing our strategic partnerships, of which I've been very, very proud of as well. As I said many times before, the Department of the Navy cannot win our nation's wars alone. And this is so very important moving into the future. Our greatest asymmetric strength lies in our network of partnerships around the world and our defense industrial base. We're supporting our British allies in the design, build, and test of the propulsion plant for their next-generation nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, the Dreadnought class SSBN, modernizing their undersea nuclear deterrent as we pursue our own modernization effort with the Columbia class SSBN. And alongside the United Kingdom, we are partnered with Australia as part of the AUKUS Security Agreement, a generational commitment by all three of our nations designed to promote our collective security. Under AUKUS, we are sharing our nuclear propulsion technology for only the second time in our nation's history, representing the largest international nuclear propulsion technology sharing agreement in 65 years. In August, Australia, Canada, the Philippines, and the United States upheld the right to freedom of navigation and overflight in support of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Together, our nations conducted a multilateral maritime cooperative activity within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, and the interoperability amongst our armed forces sends a strong signal that we are united in support of the rules-based international order. We have also strengthened our naval ties with India, deepened our strategic relationship, advancing our cooperation in undersea domain awareness and other initiatives that are so important in the Indian Ocean and elsewhere. And Japan and Australia have, within the past few years, signed agreements to purchase Tomahawk land attack missiles. In January, the United States approved the purchase of 400 TLAMs by Japan. And just this week, Australia launched a Tomahawk for the first time, a major milestone and a key step for our collective defense of the Indo-Pacific. In February, I again traveled to the Republic of Korea and Japan, where I met with top executives of some of the world's most technologically advanced and prolific dual-use commercial and naval shipyards. In June, Hanwha announced they had reached an agreement to purchase the Philadelphia shipyard. I am hopeful that Hanwha and many others will be just the first of many other world-class shipbuilders to come to America and take part in our country's maritime renaissance through direct foreign investment here in the United States, creating new American jobs to support our economy. That's what maritime statecraft is all about. We are also working on several initiatives to leverage the shipbuilding intellectual capital of our allies and partners. In June, the White House announced the Icebreaker Collaboration Effort, or ICEPACT, an enhanced trilateral partnership amongst Canada, Finland, and the United States. ICEPACT will leverage shipyards in these countries to build polar icebreakers for their own use, while also working closely with allies and partners to build and export polar icebreakers for their needs at speed and cost. And we in the Department of the Navy are working alongside Congress, industry, and academia to find innovative ways to reinforce our maritime power. And the SHIPS Act for America Act, a critical bipartisan piece of legislation announced in September, will indeed reshape our nation's maritime future. Over the past 40 years, we have allowed our domestic shipbuilding industry to decline, as I recently said. A reliance on foreign-built commercial vessels not only compromises our national security, but also undermines our economic prosperity. But by investing in American shipyards, we're investing in the skilled workers who build our commercial and naval ships, the communities that depend on them, and the broader industrial base that supports them. This bill, if passed, will provide incentives for shipbuilding here in the United States, promote innovation in maritime technology, streamline regulations to foster a more competitive industry. We need more competition in this country. And in order, again, to provide the American, how many of you are American taxpayers? Can you please put up your hands? Is there anybody in the room who's not? Please see me afterwards. I know that there's probably a couple of Canadians and UK folks that aren't, at least here in the US. But we have an obligation in government to provide that greater return on investment. And that comes through competition. And it's one of the reasons why I've been such an advocate for the small business community, for reinforcing the mid-tier companies that are out there, and for greater collaboration with large companies, so that we can all work together to a bigger goal. And just in the past 2 years, again, these are facts, you can look them up. In the small business ecosphere, we've added 7,300, nearly 7,300 small companies to the supply chain. That's how you fix problems. You go to the core root of the problem and you try to fix them. And these are 70,300 companies, not who've punched a button on a website, folks. These are companies, small businesses with real contracts with the Navy and Marine Corps. I'm very proud of that accomplishment. Now, as we look to the future, we must continue to make informed decisions about shipbuilding, maintenance, repair, and the future of the fleet, which will impact and shape the Navy for decades to come. And these problems are difficult problems to solve. I had no expectation that I would just be able to solve them in 4 years. Kind of hoped for 8 years, but it didn't work out. But it will take another decade to work through these difficult challenges. And I do pray that this next administration will embrace these challenges with as much passion and collaboration across party lines to be able to fix some of the problems, systemic problems that we have faced now for over a decade. Greater investment in our commercial and naval shipbuilding infrastructure, both public and private, is imperative to provide and maintain a Navy and Marine Corps in order to defend our national security. I'm extremely proud of everything our department has accomplished over the last 3 years and a half, and I'm excited for our Navy Marine Corps team as we chart a course for the future, a future that will require us to respond and adapt to whatever geopolitical challenges our nation may face. We are indeed a maritime nation, and it is imperative that all of us gathered here today remain committed to providing for and maintaining the Navy and Marine Corps that guarantees our national and economic security. I thank all of you for your commitment to the Department of the Navy. Communication is the key to success, and I will tell you that I prided myself in communicating with all of our stakeholders. Now, our stakeholders may not have always liked what I had to say, but I committed from very early on to communicate with industry, with academia, and with Congress in a very open and transparent way, in a manner that actually reveals the challenges that we face today in the Navy, with the hope and expectation that we'll work on these problems together and not just stick our heads in the sand. It's one of the reasons why I rolled out our 45-day study, to re-baseline where we are with all these shipbuilding programs so that we can begin anew, commit the resources necessary to fix the problems that we have. And so, thank you for all of your commitment to the Department of Maritime Services and indeed our nation. And as I close out my time as your 78th Secretary of the Navy, please know that my wife Betty and I will always carry all of you in our hearts and prayers till our dying days. May God continue to bless our sailors, our Marines, our civilians, and their families stationed around the globe with fair winds and following seas. Thank you. All right, that was the easy part. Now the Q&A. Greg.
Hey, Carlos, I want to state publicly, as I've shared with you privately, how immensely proud I am of you, both as a friend and as our Secretary of the Navy, so thank you. So I have three quick questions for you. One of them is, and now that your time as Secretary of the Navy for 3 years, what the hell has gone wrong in the last 30 years of Navy's inability to deliver a ship on time and within budget? Second one is on what would you like to see the next administration accelerate in that which you've accomplished very well? And the last one is, what message are you going to give to our Navy football team to ensure a win?
All right. I'll start with the last one first. Win the damn game. I'm 1-2. I need to be 2-2. But I'm quite confident that on Saturday, it's a great day for the American people. And, you know, these great institutions that are Annapolis, West Point, and the Coast Guard Academy and the Air Force Academy, they really are great institutions filled with amazing young men and women who want to serve their country. And it really is a great day for our country, despite the outcome, but I expect to win. To your first question about, you know, what's gone wrong, you know, I think in the early 1980s, when the Reagan administration came in, they were very passionate, obviously, about, turning over everything to the private sector and allowing the private sector to sort of take over, and with the best of intentions. I ran a company for 17 years, and I believe in market capitalism and all those sort of things. But unfortunately, without the necessary subsidies and support from the federal government, who took over is the Chinese. The Chinese took over. And thank God that our allies, Japan and South Korea, continued to build their shipbuilding capacities so that they can actually continue to build commercial ships around the world. By losing our commercial shipbuilding capacity here in this country, our naval shipbuilding suffered tremendously. And we turned more into a monopoly than having a competitive environment in which we can compete, ships and platforms and everything to keep prices down. That, of course, continued to grow over the course of time. More shipyards continued to shut down at the end of the Cold War, which became a problem, obviously, for shipbuilding. And we became the sole customer. And so now we're in this sort of monopolistic sort of environment where there's very few shipyards that build our Navy ships. And that's why I wanted to institute this new call to national maritime statecraft 3.5 years ago, knowing how difficult it would be. But I'm so pleased, and that's my hope for the future. I think the best measure of success is when other people start, taking over your ideas and running with them on their own. And God bless America. Call it whatever the hell you want in the next administration and beyond. But the core principles have to remain the same. We have to rebuild the commercial shipbuilding industry in this country. And it may be, one challenge at a time, but we got to get there in order to enhance our naval capabilities. And I'm sorry, Greg, I forgot the middle question.
What would you like to see the next administration accelerate in what
this
you've
national
accomplished?
maritime statecraft.
Okay.
That's embedded in the SHIPS Act. I was so pleased that President Trump actually, his first conversation with the President of Korea talked about shipbuilding. I think that's extraordinary. I hope they do continue to collaborate in ways that are useful and purposeful to rebuilding our maritime shipbuilding industry in this country. So. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Ellen Chang, Secretary Del Toro, really congratulations on such wonderful work that you've done. I really admire your maritime statecraft vision.
Thanks.
My question is, as a private citizen, and I work in private equity now, where can we best apply our efforts? As well as maybe, I don't know if I should ask this question, also you mentioned the SHIPS Act, but what about the Jones Act? Where does that play?
Sure. Well, the Jones Act does protect keeping American jobs here in the United States, and that's very important. But I think the more that we grow the industry in general, in every conceivable way, I think the economy gains and our national security gains by that. And and every time, look, anytime that whether it's a foreign shipbuilder or VCs here in this country, right? Private equity in this country invests in a small shipyard, and a medium-sized shipyard, and a large shipyard. It's the whole ecosphere that's impacted by that. So it's not just the shipyard itself. They rely on many sub-vendors. The prime contractor of the shipyard, relies on many, many other sub-vendors, right? And so economically, everybody wins, and it does sustain the economy. It raises wages. It's just amazing. But I will tell you that when people ask me what's the one most significant challenge that we have in the industry, it's the blue-collar workforce. We need more blue-collar workers in this country. Look, I'm very pleased and thankful to President Biden and the entire administration for making the economy as strong as it has been, although many people have suffered in different places, obviously, with the cost of goods and things like that. But the fact is that unemployment is extremely low, right? And the way you fix that is by bringing in more blue-collar workforce from other places. And so immigration reform has to be a topic that's on the agenda over the next 4 years and beyond. And it should be looked at in a very bipartisan way. Republicans and Democrats and independents all working together to increase legal immigration into this country. We have been a nation of legal immigrants coming to this country for decades and generations, right? And we need to sustain that because that's what sustains our economy. And if you expect the economy to grow dramatically, it's the only way you're going to do it. Otherwise, inflation is going to continue to rise, and it's going to be a real challenge. So,
thank you.
Tim Oliver, Independent.
By the way, that's what I learned at OMB the year that I was there as a White House fellow at OMB. So, thank you.
Independent consultant Tim Oliver. Carlos, thanks for all you've done for the nation. Eric Labs talked about the need for growth in the workforce, and you talked about the 25,000 Americans that got recruited into the military and the Navy and the Marine Corps. A couple of questions. One is, can there be an effort, or is there already going on, to target those many, many Americans who stood up, said, I want to serve, but the Navy or the Marine Corps said, yeah, but we've got somebody that's a little bit better than you are, to invite them to join this maritime industrial base and tell them about all of the opportunities that would be available to them to serve their country. That's one area. And then the other, in the short term, we know that those who have served the nation understand the sacrifice and the importance of what they did to serve the nation.
Yeah.
Efforts to make sure that those folks, as they exit the door to become citizens again, know that there's all these opportunities, that they can be
Yes.
trained for free and be able to get great jobs.
So the answer is yes, we're trying. Our National Maritime Call to Service is not just a Navy call to service. It's a call to primarily uniform service of the Navy and Marine Corps, but it's also a call to serve in the reserves if you don't want to serve in a full-time capacity in the Navy and Marine Corps. It's also a call to join the Department of the Navy. You know, we have many dedicated, and I want to thank all the dedicated Department of the Navy and Marine Corps civilians who work in our department. We would not be able to do our jobs. We would not be able to keep these, you know, ship construction programs on track and provide the necessary oversight that's critical to the American taxpayer if we did not have government employees helping our uniformed service members on all these tasks across the field. So that is an essential, critical piece of success in the future. Without them, we'll see further delays in programs, higher costs in how much these programs cost, and it will be critical to maintain these amazing civil servants who work across our entire Pentagon, our entire military system, and our entire government for that matter. But it is a comprehensive call to service is what it is. And so, you know, and if not, then we point you towards buildsubmarines.com or any of the other websites that are out there or the shipyards in order to, and we've been working very closely with industry. And I see my good friend back there, Mark, you know, who will tell you that we have been engaged with them to try to bring labor to the shipyards everywhere that we can.
Thank you.
Rob Rise, Palace Advisors. You said earlier that our manufacturing base has declined due to lack of government subsidies, and now we have Hanwha rehabbing our nation's oldest shipyard in Philly and a Japanese firm trying to buy U.S. Steel. So,
I didn't say anything about the Japanese trying to buy U.S. Steel.
Roger.
Just to be clear and exact.
Roger.
Good.
So, simple question: are we delegating the rebuilding of that industrial base to partner nations simply because we refuse to?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat it again? I know you're reading off your cell phone, but
are we delegating the manufacturing base and the rehab of the industrial base to our partner nations simply because we refuse to raise taxes for those subsidies that existed?
No, I don't think there's a direct equation there. I think what we're calling for is actually greater investment, international investment here in the U.S., so that we can create more American jobs, so that we actually reinforce the manufacturing industry in this country. That's exactly what we're doing.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. For those who might not know me, Mark Vandroff, Fincantieri Marinette Marine. Thank you very much for your leadership over these last 3.5 years, sir. A question that I hope you can answer at the unclassified level.
Okay.
I was recently in a conversation, and I was talking about how proud we should all be of our Navy's performance these last, I'll call it 13, 14 months in the Red Sea, given the threat environment, given the combat operations they were engaged in. And my interlocutor, who I will not name, dismissed that as an unsophisticated threat. And while I said probably not at the sophistication of a peer competitor like the People's Republic of China, it was my impression now as an outsider looking in that it was a sophisticated threat, and it showed both the superiority of American firepower and the resilience of our sailors. But would you like to comment on just what kind of threat were our forces engaged with these last 14 months in the Red Sea?
Without question, it is the singular most thing that I am most proud of our United States Navy. I will walk out with my head held high that at least I have tried every single day to support those sailors out there in the Red Sea, collectively with our entire industrial might and our entire industry behind them. And what those sailors and Marines have done in the Red Sea is extraordinary. There is absolutely nothing commonplace about what they do. And yes, every day there's a new article that goes out in the press, and it almost seems just like commonplace, and the American people pay very little attention to it. Yet, they are the bravest individuals who have served our country in many ways. It's incredible what they've done, what they've defeated in terms of the sophistication of the attacks that have come at them from the Houthis in the Sea of Aden and the Red Sea as well too. Just a couple of days ago, 2 of our destroyers again took down several missiles and drones that were fired at them. And so we're very, very proud. And it's also a reflection of making smart choices and investments in the capabilities of the Navy and the Marine Corps. Because these are investments that were made 30, 40 years ago in the Aegis Combat Weapons System, for example. And in the training, as I talk about strengthening and focusing on the warfighting culture of our sailors and our Marines, what we've done to train them over the past decade is truly extraordinary. And they deserve all the credit and the praise of the American people. So thank you for asking that question, Mark.
Morning, Mr. Secretary. Austin Gray with Blue Water Autonomy. So Senator Wicker, who's speaking next, I think sent you a letter along with Chairman Reed a couple weeks ago about the large and medium unmanned surface programs.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of work and discussion going on there, obviously, and there's Replicator as well. But I'm curious on your take, and I appreciate all the programs you highlighted in your notes earlier. But I
did notice
I noticed there was nothing about unmanned. So what's going on with medium and
no,
large
that was
there?
no oversight on my part. Let me tell you, I have been overly enthusiastic since day one to support all of our unmanned efforts. When you take a look at what Task Force 59 has done over the last couple of years, what we're doing now with Task Force 59.1, what we're doing with Task Force 66 in the Mediterranean, what we've done out in the Pacific with medium unmanned surface vehicles, of which I am a huge proponent of, and that's where I think the bulk of the investment needs to be made over the next several years. Not ignoring large unmanned surface vessels as well, too. We need to fully explore how we would develop the concept of operations for large unmanned surface vessels. But I think investments in medium unmanned surface vessels makes all the sense in the world. And even the Caribbean. Over a year ago, I directed the CNO to actually start conducting unmanned operations with, with sail drones in the Caribbean. And we operate them off the eastern coast of Cuba and off the western coast of Haiti through the straits there, where a bulk of the cocaine actually flows into the southern coast of the United States, and a lot of the illegal arms actually flows in both directions. Unmanned technology is the way of the future. It's both manned and unmanned fleet working together is extremely important. When I take a look at the upcoming deployment of Orca, for example, right? Boeing is delivering the first Orca. We're very excited by that as well, too. And that's going to present a whole new complex challenge for our adversaries in the Pacific to have to deal with and around the globe. So, yes, forgive me for not having included it in the speech, but I am the biggest supporter of unmanned technology. MQ-25 on the naval aviation side. And the greatest thing about unmanned technology and all these unmanned platforms, you know what they are? When these ships pull into ports, there's no liberty incidents. Some of our old retired sailors finally got it. Admiral, good to see you.
Good to see you too, sir. So if does the SHIPS Act go far enough? If you were king for a day, what would you have added to the SHIPS Act that's not there? In anticipation of seeing Senator Wicker and Senator Kaine, give me some ammunition here.
More money for the Navy and Marine Corps. No, look, there's statutes on the books right now. Title 46 is a statute that we discovered during our, launching our National Maritime Statecraft. So if it costs, say, $100 million to build a ship, I'm using hypothetical numbers here, overseas, if it costs $100 million here, but it costs $80 million overseas, you could subsidize $20 million of those dollars under Title 46 and actually have the ship built here by an American shipyard. That's just one example. So I think there are other things that can be done. But look, this is a great start, and I applaud Representative Waltz, and I applaud Senator Kelly. I know Senator Young is also thinking about coming on as well, too, in a big way. to support this moving forward. I support all of the members of Congress right now who are going to hopefully introduce this thing sometime in the next several weeks or so, and hopefully the Congress will vote on this. And it's a beginning, right? It takes a long time for legislation to truly take hold and take off and grow and all those things. But this is a great start, and I really support, I thank Senator Wicker and all the others who supported us to get this done.
Sir Moonpick, class of 22, now Naval Institute, beat officer.
Good.
My question is that, sir, I like your policy on attracting foreign direct investment so that foreign company may come and invest in the U.S. But do you think there is any problem with technology transfer, sir?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of your question.
So my question is that, do you see that there's any problem with technology transfer, sir?
Technology that supports?
Yes, sir, to support the fleet, because technology probably different in between different companies. For example, like Korea, they probably have different technology, and the U.S. probably have different technology.
You'd be surprised, actually. There's a lot of commonality between the types of technologies, AI and robotics and others that all of these large companies use. And, robotics is just one example. I mean, robotics is transforming our own shipyards here in this country, and the introduction of AI and for mass production of steel and other things as well, too. The digitization of the shipyard and its operations itself is something that we need to continue to invest in, right? So that when a pump shows up late on a Tuesday afternoon, on a Wednesday morning, you could understand what the impact of that pump showing up late is to the delivery of the ship. That's where we need to move towards. So I think there has been a lot of investment in CapEx. I wish a lot more investments in CapEx would be made with corporate money and not taxpayer money, but that's okay. It needs to continue to grow, both taxpayer-funded CapEx and corporate-funded CapEx as well, too, into the future, so that we can buy technology like that makes a difference. And I think I'm about to get the hook.
Mr. Secretary, I just want to say, I know your days are numbered here, but thank you.
By the way, I'm not dying. I'm just moving on. And I'm doing
I didn't mean it that way.
And I'm doing a lot of research on what I'm going to do next. In fact, if anybody after the session has any ideas about what the best beach in the Caribbean is, let me know, okay? Because I'd like some good advice on that subject.
I just, on behalf of this audience, I just want to thank you for your tremendous service to our nation, your passionate service in leading the Navy Marine Corps, and you've been especially supportive of the Naval Institute. So Amen. I want to thank you personally for that. And as a small token of our appreciation, present you with the book, The Neptune Factor by Nick Lambert.
Thank you so much.
All right, sir. Thank you. Hooray!
Thank you. I promise you it'll be the first book that I read on the beach. I'm going to stick around, by the way, for the next speaker. So.
Sir. It's now my great honor to introduce our next speaker, Senator Roger Wicker, who is a Republican who has represented Mississippi in the U.S. Senate since 2007. He served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force and then joined the Air Force Reserve, retiring from the Reserve in 2004 at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Senator Wicker is the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. A champion for a strong national defense, he authored the Securing the Homeland by Increasing Our Power on the Seas, or SHIPS Act, establishing the goal of a 355-ship Navy to enhance U.S. security and shipbuilding. Recently, he introduced 21st Century Peace Through Strength, a comprehensive plan to rebuild the military and increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, ensuring America is prepared to meet global challenges. Senator Wicker has dedicated his career to supporting the military, fostering American competitiveness, and advocating for policies that strengthen our nation's defense capabilities. Please welcome Senator Roger Wicker.
Thank you much. Appreciate it. Put my water here. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I wish I had been here earlier to hear the Secretary Del Toro. Let me tell you, those of you who have heard me before know that at an event like this, I usually try to speak off the cuff, and I save my prepared remarks for the Senate floor. I'm going to try to stick to prepared remarks today because I want to make sure I choose my words correctly, and I have a lot that I want to say, and maybe we'll take a question or two. We are certainly here at a pivotal moment for our country, and a pivotal moment in our quest to achieve peace through strength. And this audience knows better than I do that we will need that strength because we find ourselves at an increasingly dangerous time. Dictators for life run 4 adversaries of ours, and they are working together as never before. Tyrants in charge of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are on the move, and they're working together. But just as we find ourselves in a precarious situation, we find ourselves at a turning point. We have a chance to stem the tide of these rising threats, or we can let them escalate. Now is the moment. I have a big poster in my conference room of Winston Churchill. If you come to see me and you're sitting at the table, you'll see Winston Churchill somewhat glaring down at you. In the years before World War II, he talked about a gathering storm. He later wrote about the gathering storm. He was referring, of course, to Nazi Germany. He was referring to the Italians marching on North Africa, and the Japanese were readying their fleet. He also used another phrase called a period of consequences. So, a gathering storm and a period of consequences. The question is, are we at a point of a gathering storm? Today we see an axis of aggressors: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Their sophistication and collaboration has begun to loom large compared to the threat that we faced and that the Brits faced before World War II. So let's review. Just this year, China used its considerable economic engine to assist Russia. Xi Jinping helped Russian President Putin manufacture materiel. In return, Russia sent submarine technology to China. Beijing appears poised to close the gap in submarine technology, thanks in part to Moscow. This year, we watched Iran-backed Houthis repeatedly target U.S. Navy warships in the Red Sea. What did the Houthis do then? They showed up in Ukraine, turning their fire on Ukrainian cities in Putin's illegal war. So we've seen North Korea send troops to Ukraine. Houthis, North Korea, helping Russia in Ukraine. Reports indicate that the number of troops will rise to an impressive 120,000 in the coming months. Again, Russia has returned the favor. News reports tell us that Putin is likely to send Kim Jong-un first-rate defense technology in exchange for those troops. Iran has received Chinese and Russian help in the forms of surveillance technology, missile defense, and other technical support. As this axis collaborates, it seeks to create something of a spider's web for the United States and for those of us in the West. It hopes to entangle us as the tyrants march on. So this is what we're up against. Will the storm actually gather? When we look back on this period, will there have been a gathering storm? We can make decisions at this point, and I hope we are paused in this new year, in this new opportunity, to avoid the outcome of the storm. Is it a period of consequences? Yes, it is. And in the words of Churchill, the choices Britain made then had consequences, and they will shape the future today just as they did decades and decades ago when my father was in uniform. We must make the right choices because we are not where we need to be today. We are not where we need to be today, and you don't have to take the word of an elected official for that. Listen to our nation's top military leaders. Listen to former top military leaders from other decades and other administrations. And once you hear as many as I have, you will begin to notice the trends. You get a sense of the big picture. If you put all these together, they paint a picture, and it is not a positive one. Their testimony tells me that we are up against significant challenges and that our national defense is not well equipped to meet the moment. Every member of this axis of aggression poses a threat. Chief among them are China, led by an aspiring military superpower, its dictator Xi Jinping. It is not an exaggeration to say that Xi Jinping is actively preparing for war. It is not an exaggeration to say that Xi Jinping is preparing for war against the United States. And of course, he said publicly to his Congress, to be broadcast around the world, that they need to be ready to retake Taiwan by the year 2027. We're on the eve of the year 2025 right now. Last year, the Chinese Navy put 30 hulls in the water, including a carrier. Their shipbuilding capacity is a breathtaking 200 times larger than ours. Their capacity is 200 times larger than ours. China is producing fifth-generation fighters at scale. It's building nuclear weapons faster than we had predicted even recently. In the past decade, they've leapfrogged Russia in space capabilities and long-range missiles. These are public facts. Check them out. Beijing is on the cusp of world-changing abilities in aerospace technology. In the Western Pacific, Chinese forces outnumber and outgun American capabilities. If a conflict erupted, we would be the lesser force on day one. It would take weeks for supporting naval and air assets to arrive. Spending is, of course, not the only measure. I'm told this by a number of my colleagues quite often. But defense spending is one of the measures. It's one of the metrics to measure a country's military strength that tells us how seriously we take the situation. Last year, China increased its military spending by 7.2%. Meanwhile, under the Biden administration, our defense investment has not even kept up with inflation. In terms of real purchasing, we have begun to spend less and less. And listen, the election is over. I'm not trying to be political here. I'm just stating a fact, and I'm stating something that needs to be rectified. Even in my own party, I have to discuss this fact with people who do not understand that defense spending is at a real problem. And our industrial base has atrophied. In the Second World War, our munition stores, our shipyards, and our arsenals of democracy were the envy of the world. Back then, one family-owned Wisconsin shipyard built 28 submarines in a period of 2 years. I mean, just think about that as compared to what we do today. The entire United States Navy can muster only 1.2 Virginia-class submarines per year in just 2 main shipyards. Back then, it took only 3 days to repair the USS Yorktown, a battered carrier, before deploying it to fight at Midway. Today, there are ships in our fleet that have been waiting for repairs for more than 7 years. I think that's worth repeating. We have American ships that have been awaiting repair for 7 years. These statistics say many things, but two conclusions rise to the top. First, we need to take proper care of our fleet, and at the same time, we need to revitalize American military might. And we need to get started today. America is a maritime power, and America is an aerospace power. We have remained free and preeminent because we've had command of the oceans for 2 centuries, and we've had command of the skies since the mid-40s. A complicated set of institutions have made that possible for a long time. They cover everything from shipyards and factories to college campuses and the Wall Street trading floor. These and other institutions have allowed America to become a military superpower. We achieved such strength because the entire nation got on board when we had to. That's our heritage as Americans, and it ought to be our model going forward. Our military leaders understood this. Admiral Nimitz once noted, quote, "There's scarcely a village in the geographical center of the continent which does not contribute in some way to American sea power." We've moved a little away from that. We need to get back to that. We need to give every constituency, every state in our country a stake in unlocking the great industrial powerhouse of our country. Otherwise, we cannot hope to build consensus around rebuilding our Navy and our military more broadly. Now, I hope many of you know, and I appreciate the mention in the introduction, that this year I published a plan to get us there in my role as ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. It's a decision based on very much input that I've received from around the country. I intend to use that as I assume the chairmanship of the Armed Services Committee after the 3rd of January. And it's clear to me, based on the big picture that we paint in my report, that 3% of GDP falls far short. President Reagan's military buildup, which got us almost to 600 ships, is long gone. For the next few years, we need to go back to following Ronald Reagan's lead by matching his spending levels. That investment will lead to a host of programs benefiting the Air Force, the Navy, our nuclear capabilities, and our defense capabilities in general. When it comes to the surface fleet, we must change the way the Navy does business. I think this audience in particular understands the problems with the Navy's business practices. But let me just summarize a few. We have the smallest fleet we've had in over 100 years. Soon we'll have the oldest fleet in that same time frame. Surface combatants will be more than 20 years old on average. Older ships are being kept online longer, making it more expensive to sustain. In 1997, it cost $15 million on average to maintain ships. Today, in constant dollars, it costs over $50 million. Industry might not be perfect, but only a poor craftsman blames the tools. We need, as a country, as a government, as industry, to look at the common thread underlying shipbuilding struggles: the Navy bureaucracy. The Navy has not yet improved as a customer, regulator, and technical authority. Until it does, the Navy must take responsibility for repeated episodes of acquisition malpractice. So, let's illustrate a broader point. In the last several years, the Navy authorized moving forward with the Constellation-class frigate program. the Constellation design was expected to have commonality with European designs, 85% commonality. This would make it rapidly producible. But what happened? In the end, after a number of changes, the designs had just 15% commonality. In any industry, it's hard for a provider to deliver for a customer that cannot make up its own mind. That is especially hard when that provider is building our nation's most sophisticated weaponry. In the coming administration, we have an opportunity. We have a real opportunity to change the way the Navy does business, to make it more transparent as a client, and to give our shipyards the demand signal they desperately need. But we are not reforming the Navy's business practices just for fun. We need to do so in order to get a larger fleet. Both history and the threat at hand convince us that our Navy must grow. We are asking our current force to protect free and open sea lanes. We're asking them to forward deploy in 3 dangerous theaters that are increasingly dangerous. And we're preparing for a potential high-intensity conflict, all at the same time. And we've been doing this as we leave the surface fleet in a near-death spiral. Longer deployments followed by even more maintenance. It's no wonder why accidents have been happening more often. A larger fleet would give us options and flexibility. It would also serve as a blunt instrument of American strength. It would help our enemies understand our capabilities. A few years ago, I authored and the President signed the SHIPS Act. That law set a fleet size minimum for the Navy. It is now a statutory requirement that we have a 355 ship Navy, and I can assure you the Congress did not arrive at that number. The Congress chose a number given to us by the admirals and generals who are out there trying to protect the country. We need to reach this amount before it's too late. Building 41 new ships over the next 10 years. 41 new ships over the next 10 years. No small task. We're headed in the right direction when it comes to our submarine industrial base. We're sending the right demand signal, and we ought to do the same with the rest of the shipbuilding industry. Doing so would help us close the shipbuilding gap. So we must increase the fleet size. We must send the right demand signals to industry. We must also be innovative. In that spirit, I have proposed a small surface combatant. It would be attritable, but armed to the teeth with some of our best precision missiles. It would be producible today, and we could make them by the dozens, and the way we had hoped to do for the Constellation class. Small, uncrewed, attritable surface combatants. The innovation mindset is a classic American trait. It leads me to a final way we can build the Navy strong enough to deter China. We must make big bets on emerging technology, both large and small. On the large side, there's AUKUS, a great achievement of the past administration. We need to make good on our AUKUS agreement. Actually, we need to supercharge our AUKUS agreement. I've been pleased to see substantial attention directed toward our submarine industrial base through AUKUS. Let's build on that progress to get more submarines out to sea faster. Today, our Virginia program is an output of just 1.2 per year. 1.2 Virginia-class subs per year. With the right mix of investments, incentives, and attention, we must get that number to above 2 per year. We will continue building the best-in-class platforms for our sailors and crew, and of course, uncrewed technology is rapidly maturing. We should augment the manned vessels with uncrewed tools. We'll have to invest in lower-cost alternatives, such as small and medium uncrewed warships and undersea vehicles. Some of these technologies are primed to change the battle space in short order. One day we'll be able to operate these platforms alongside our traditional ships, which will create a formidable 1-2 punch. These platforms can be bought by the hundreds, they can be attrited, they are affordable, they are expendable, and they are a real bear for our adversaries to detect. We should improve our odds in that kind of fight. Large or small, we must build this fleet by the mid-2030s. It will take a full team to do that. I know you're all on board, and I'm pleased to say that we have a great team in government to put us forward on this goal. The new chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee will be Senator Collins of Maine. She understands the situation, and so does Senator Lindsey Graham on budget. Senator McConnell will be leading the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and he's on board with this project. As a matter of fact, he's been one of the principal champions speaking out in favor of my report. Our incoming Senate Majority Leader, Senator John Thune, wants to help, and my colleagues in the House, Speaker Johnson, Chairman Rogers, are defense hawks and ready to pitch in. And my friends in the Trump administration know the stakes, and they know what we need to do, and we're certainly working with them as much as we possibly can and having conversations with them almost every day. So we have a varsity team. They'll be ready as soon as the whistle blows, which will be actually now. In the coming weeks, I will be focused on how we can use the reconciliation process to begin this military rebuild. The reconciliation budget process to begin this military rebuild. This is a generational opportunity, and we need to get started as soon as possible. I hope Congress will pursue our shared work of peace through strength. It's time to get this done. Thank you very much for having me. I'll take questions from either this section or this section, but not that section. I'm just kidding. Comment? Oh, yes. Hello.
Senator Gregory Glaros, you mentioned, and everyone is agreeing with the number of ships that need to be built and its manning. But what about legislation that would encourage our allies, such as Australia, to stop shipping iron ore to China and to put high tariffs on steel exported from China itself? Cut them off at the source rather than just competing with them in the numbers.
Well, will that take legislation, or can it be done by executive, in your opinion?
I think it's both from that standpoint, to support the current president-elect that we have, but to make it more enduring beyond any administration. China receives over 80% of its iron ore from our ally, Australia. Yet are we going to continue to fight against our own allies economically, or how can we support them and get rid of that iron ore?
Thank you for bringing that up. That is an issue that has not yet come to my attention, so I do appreciate that.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you. A really smart friend of mine who grew up in the acquisition community of the Navy tells me that the technology community and the acquisition community in the Navy accept zero risk. And as a result of that, all the risk gets passed down to the operational forces. And they waive this instruction called DOD 5000, which is the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and as their protection for accepting no risk. And again, the operational forces take it all. This is a suggestion along the same lines. We really need to review that DOD 5000, get the regulations right, and pass the risk, push the risk back on the acquisition community and the technical community, so it's not all on the operational forces.
A shared risk.
Shared risk. In the technical community, you can say no. The acquisition community is protected by those regulations. And so we have ships that We have ships that are tied up for 7 years waiting for maintenance.
And let me ask you: Are you talking to anybody in the incoming administration about this?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, again, two very significant suggestions, and I hope to continue a conversation with each of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, Senator Don Klein, retired naval aviator. I'm going to ask you an unglamorous question, and that's our capability to actually repair our ships forward in the event of conflict. Battle damage repair is a huge, dirty, dangerous task, and currently we would have to cycle ships back to CONUS or Guam, which itself is going to be in a contested environment. Has the Navy provided you any studies to show what it would take to kind of reconstitute that repair ship afloat capability to take it forward, much like we did everywhere across the Pacific during World War II? Thank you.
The Navy has not suggested that to me. It might be that the Secretary could help me respond to that, and I would very much appreciate that.
Yes, sir. So right now, actually, one issue that's been kind of going back and forth for the last couple of years is the retirement of ESDs, and I have not been a proponent necessarily to retire those ESDs, but to actually turn them into heavy lift ships. So that, and there's a proposal that we're looking at in the Navy to actually just make an investment of about $20 million, and we could actually turn those into ESDs for heavy lift ships that would be very useful should a conflict come in the future. But if I may just take a moment, sir, I know you said you wouldn't take any questions from this side.
No, actually.
But I want to share a comment with you.
But I believe the question was about repair facilities west of Guam.
Yeah, so there is legislative proposals to actually increase the number of voyage repairs that the Navy can conduct overseas, and that's very, very useful because we want to determine which shipyards right now we could actually work with before a conflict should arrive, so we know exactly where to be able to send those ships. So I hope that that's one proposal that actually gets passed in legislation in the future, so we can have more shipyard voyage repairs in shipyards where we know we may need them. So.
And do you have any suggestions as to precisely where that might be?
No, sir. I think my question was really about in conflict, because we may or may not be able to rely upon fixed shipyards. And then back in the 80s, during the era of the Reagan buildup, we had ARs, repair ships of various sizes and capabilities that could be easily moved around within the theater. And I think on disaggregating and maybe going to a smaller design, much like you're talking about with SSC, is have multiple out there to be able to do 80% of the battle damage repair, so that within the realms of technology, we can do a quick return to battle, much like what you illustrated with the repair of the Yorktown prior to Midway. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion. Yes, sir.
So the one comment I wanted to make, Senator, and I really do appreciate our service together this past 3.5 years, is thank you for your support on NAV ski yachts. That is an issue that you and I have very aggressively supported, and I appreciate all the additional funding and support you provided for that.
Thank you very much, sir. And yes, it has been rewarding.
Yes, sir.
To make some accomplishments. One more question?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Good morning, Senator. Tina L.A. I'm asking as a private citizen. So continuing resolutions have been documented as drivers of delays in contracting and execution. So if a private shipyard that's fixing one of our DDGs has to wait for a contract in April, that means they're 6 months behind. There's been documentation from the Navy and a study by MITRE that showed that for RCOHs, which are the midlife overhauls for aircraft carriers, continuing resolutions have driven significant growth and cost and delays. Would the legislator be willing to consider shielding the ship industrial base and shipbuilding, ship repair from the limitations of continuing resolutions?
Well, I think continuing resolutions are terrible, and they have the precise negative effect that you mentioned and more. as a matter of fact, this particular continuing resolution, which regrettably we seem to be stuck with, will do more harm to defense than to domestic programs. So it's a question of leadership. It's a question of bringing legislation to the floor, and without being personal, there in the United States Senate there is one individual who brings legislation to the floor, and that is the majority leader. We'll soon have a new majority leader, but for whatever reason, perhaps because of the election, perhaps because of other considerations, issues that did not bode well for one party or the other, the majority leader this year has been unwilling to bring the NDAA to the floor, except for the two fairly procedural take it or leave it votes that we'll take next week, and also has engineered through his majority a series of appropriations measures that have not been able to get us to actual appropriation bills and stuck us with a continuing resolution. Continuing resolutions do not save money; they waste money, and I regret that some members of my own party in the House and Senate have been responsible also for calling for continuing resolutions. They need to be avoided. I hope the new leadership, with working in the Senate now, as most Americans do, 5 days a week, week after week after week, we can move legislation and do things through regular order. Folks, listen, I've got a great staff. One of them's here, but we listen to people. We meet with dozens of people every week. We value your input, and the suggestions we've had today. We have taken notes, and we'll get back to you about that. We need your help, but I hope you agree we are not where we need to be. And I need the help of constituencies and people who've done this forever and ever to help us get to the position where peace is achieved because we're so strong. Thank you very much.
Senator Wicker, I just want to thank you for your leadership in the Senate, and thank you for your future leadership of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Despite your Air Force background, I hope you're rooting for the right team this weekend. But as a small token of our appreciation, the Neptune Factor by Nicholas A. Lambert,
thank you.
Institute Press.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. By the way, we're going to take a break after this next speaker, a short break. But it's my great honor to introduce Senator Tim Kaine, who was elected to the Senate in 2012, serves on the Armed Services, Budget, Foreign Relations, and Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions committees. He's committed to ensuring our military has the support and resources it needs to meet its mission, and he has worked across the aisle to strengthen our armed forces by pushing for funding of top-of-the-line aircraft carriers and submarines. As chair of the Sea Power Subcommittee, he's been the Senate's foremost leader on the AUKUS agreement, under which the US, UK, and Australia will partner on submarine manufacturing and technology. The father of a Marine, he plays an important role in crafting defense strategy and in providing the military the resources it needs and ensuring veterans are cared for properly. Please welcome Senator Tim Kaine.
Well, good morning. It is great to be with you. I want to thank the Naval Institute for inviting me to come and share. I appreciate being able to be here with the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, who is a good friend, and with my colleague on the committee, Senator Wicker. He and I have worked closely together since I came to the Senate in 2013. He'll be a great chair, and I think the Armed Services Committee in the Senate will continue you know, we're biased, but we think we're the one committee that still does it the way it's supposed to happen, an authorizing bill every year where every member of the committee gets to offer every amendment they want till no one has anything left to say. And the most junior member has the same challenge as the chair, which is convince a majority plus one of the committee to accept my amendment. The Armed Services Committee is a real model for being able to be bipartisan, even really nonpartisan in the way we approach business. It is a busy time. We are trying to finish up a budget deal that will be a short-term budget deal. Regrettably, I echo what my colleague Senator Wicker said, to finish up the defense bill. Before I get into my comments, just we will get the defense bill done. Look, it's unfortunate that we're doing the defense bill in the way we're doing it without true floor processes that open up the opportunities for amendments. I like doing the NDA by regular order. We put it out of the committee in the summer, and then we have a floor process. I don't need the floor process because I get my amendments in the committee. So by the time the bill has come out of committee, I usually, because of my fantastic staff, I have Caitlin Clyburn, a defense fellow, Angelica Perkins here, I usually get my priorities in the committee. But it's such an important bill that the members of the Senate who aren't on the Armed Services Committee should have the opportunity to shape it as well. We will, in the NDA that will get done here in the next 10 days, there will be priorities that were not in the committee bills, but the only ones that get in are the ones that are unanimous. And so I wish we can go back to having an actual floor process where everybody can put their thumbprints on the bill. Nevertheless, we will get it done. On the budget, it is regrettable. We shouldn't be pushing the CR into next calendar year. We were on track to get the appropriations bill done by December 20. The change in the legislative majority led, and you can understand this, one side to say, hey, why would we want to do this with the Democrats controlling one house? Let's do it when we control all three levers. And so that is the reason for pushing from December into March. Now, we shouldn't have even had to push it into December. We could have done it earlier, and so I recognize the truth of what Senator Wicker said. The majority leader can call up a bill. But once we decided we were going to get the bill done by December, the decision was made by the incoming majority, let's wait and do it by March, and I hope that that March date will hold. I hope that it's as easy to find an appropriations deal with all three levers controlled by one party as I think the party believes it will be, but we're going to have to keep pressure on to make sure it's done. I completely agree with what Roger said about the dangers of CR, and frankly, CR hurts defense more than it does other priorities. I'm honored to come and speak with you today. And I'm excited by the topic of the event. As a senator from Virginia and chairman now and soon to be ranking member of the Sea Power Subcommittee, I'm really grateful to sailors and shipbuilders for the outstanding work done to keep this country safe and to ensure that the U.S. Navy remains the most capable and lethal naval force in the world. I'm going to focus on two areas where I think we really need to be mindful as we move forward, areas of challenge and opportunity. While it is true that our Navy is the world's most powerful, the past decades have revealed some significant vulnerabilities and weaknesses in our capacity to build and maintain the forces necessary to have dominance at sea as a range of powers around the world changes and pushes more focus into the Indo-Pacific. If we don't correct the current course that we're on, we certainly run the risk of losing our edge over our competitors, and that'll have ripple effects on every aspect of American life. Navy in particular, when you lose naval dominance, you're not only losing military dominance, but because of the role that the U.S. Navy has disproportionately played over the years in maintaining free access on the seas to commerce, naval weakness also has a disproportionate effect on our economic competitiveness, even compared with the readiness and excellence levels of the other service branches. When it comes to building up our naval force structure and capacity, the primary challenge we face, in my view, is human capital. I'm on the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee in addition to Armed Services. And in the help space, my real focus is workforce, and in particular, things like career and technical education. I think the human capital challenge facing the nation generally, the military generally, but the Navy in particular, is a source of grave concern. And if you were asked me, you know, what worries me the most, set aside the military, what worries me the most about the U.S. economy right now, I would say workforce issues. I expect everybody in the room is familiar with the recruiting challenges that our armed services faces. And they're somewhat predictable in a time of low unemployment and decreasing propensity to serve, and a lower percentage of young Americans who meet the qualifications to serve. These challenges in recruiting into the active duty force are likely to persist. But the issue is not unique to the armed services. In fact, nothing within the armed services doesn't have its analog or its origin in the civilian side. Our shipbuilders are in a very stiff competition with industries to attract and develop the next generation of the shipbuilding workforce. And the fact of the matter is these jobs are hard. It takes a special kind of person to raise their right hand to serve the country. And long working days at Newport News Shipbuilding or other shipyards around the country, these are not easy jobs. And you take not only the low unemployment rate we have now, but increased competition. In Hampton Roads, for example, we're super proud that we're standing up an offshore wind industry, a great new blue water industry that will be an attractive one for people with a manufacturing skill set. At the same time as we are producing more work for our shipyards, we're also growing industries that will compete with the shipyards for these talented workers who are already in too short supply. For their part, the armed services are improving recruiting practices, doing things to pre-qualify people to more ably meet physical standards, for example. We've placed an increased focus on service member quality of life so that we can improve retention. Sometimes the challenge is less on the recruiting side than on the retention side. The NDAA that we will pass next week dedicates significant resources to improving quality of life and encouraging young people to serve. When it comes to shipbuilders and other sectors of the industrial base, we've got a number of tools available to address these issues. Some of the quality of life issues can seem, if you're not in the biz, can seem a little bit odd, like why would the construction of parking decks in Newport News be valuable to retention? Well, all you have to do is go visit the shipyard and see how long the walk is every morning to get to the gate, to begin at 6 a.m., to realize if you can shorten that walk and improve people's quality of life, it's going to be a real improvement and incentive for them to remain in the business. Workforce development programs have to be a priority within the military and without, and we're seeing some promising results on this front. But I want to mention one area that I'm working on that I consider myself a persuasive person, but I'm frankly often a very slowly persuasive person. I filed a bill in 2014 to allow Pell Grants to be used for high-quality career and technical education, not just college. I now have more than 60 co-sponsors of this bill called the Jobs Act, and yet I have not been able to get it passed. In the last couple of years, we've done an infrastructure bill. That's fantastic. We've done a chips manufacturing bill. We just had a huge announcement about that in Virginia. That's fantastic. We've increased our commitments to shipbuilding, not only building our own ships and subs, but now we're going to build them and sell them to the Aussies. Who's going to build it? Who's going to construct it? Who's going to be the shipbuilder and sub-builder of the future? We need to do in the workforce space some things that are a little bit creative, like acknowledge career and technical education can be every bit as valuable as college and allow incentives for one to be more broadly used. But we are doing some strong things in workforce training. I'll give you an example. Some of you are familiar with the Advanced Training and Defense Manufacturing, ATDM, a pilot program that is up and running in Danville, Virginia. Danville's on the southern border of Virginia, right across from North Carolina, traditional manufacturing community, textile, furniture, tires. Textile and furniture largely went offshore, but the manufacturing ethic is still very strong in Danville. And so the Navy has stood up a pilot program in Danville to train the next generation of ship and sub-builders. The program isn't even at maximum capacity yet. There's a new facility being constructed that will begin to be open this spring. But we've already had hundreds of graduates being employed in 37 different states at over 153 different companies from across the ship and sub-building industrial base. And these are workers who have trained together, who have a common set of experiences and skill sets, and they're not only who you might think. The last time I was there and visited a classroom, I saw youngsters who are really excited to do manufacturing work in Danville or Hampton Roads or Puget Sound, but I also saw Aussies. The local coffee shops in Danville are always struck by how the accents are so different from the Southern Australians, from the Southside Virginians. But the other group of people that are pretty common in these classrooms are Afghan immigrants. Afghans who worked to help defend the United States in Afghanistan, who are here either under special immigrant visa or humanitarian parole, who've decided, okay, I'm in the United States, I've made a life and even sacrificed to help defend the United States, and now why don't I do the same thing by being a ship and sub builder? This next generation of welders, machinists, additive manufacturers are entering the workforce well-trained and motivated to contribute to our industrial base. This program is a pilot. It's growing and evolving, but others are also looking at it, and I believe the Navy has made it a commitment for at least one other in the Great Lakes region, as I understand. We can apply this model in other parts of the country to encourage young Americans or career-changing, not-so-young Americans to come and explore these really important careers. While workforce development programs offer great training for those entering the workforce, they don't address the ongoing and, in my fear, somewhat long-term labor shortage we're experiencing in the country. The unemployment rate, as you all know, is low. It's just hovering above 4% right now. The most common complaint that I hear as I travel around Virginia, I just got out of an election cycle where I was talking to people every day, and what I hear is, boy, it's hard to hire people. I hear it from hospitals, I hear it from general contractors, I hear it from the hospitality industry, I hear it from shipbuilders, I hear it from the ag sector. It's hard to hire people, it's hard to keep people. We need an infusion of workers if our industrial base is going to meet the demands of the Navy, as well as the commitments that we've made to our allies, for example, through this AUKUS partnership. We are not going to be able to meet these needs if we don't do something about the immigration system, period. There is no amount of Pell Grants for career and technical education or try to encourage somebody to leave one shipbuilder and move across the street for a higher salary at the next shipbuilder. We're not going to get our way out of this problem. Our birth rate's not going to change. If it did tomorrow, we wouldn't see it for 25 years. Low unemployment, declining birth rate, we cannot solve this problem for the Navy, for shipbuilding, or for the nation if we don't meaningfully embrace a workforce-based immigration reform. And we need it. We haven't done anything meaningful to do immigration reform since the Immigration Reform Bill of 1986. 48 years? 48 years. Put it another way, our immigration system hasn't fundamentally changed in a significant way since before the flip phone was invented. When framed as an economic and national security necessity, I'm hopeful that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will be able to come together and make positive reforms to meet the needs of our industrial base, including immigration reform. When most Americans hear immigration, the picture that comes up in their mind is the border. We all have to be message deliverers so that when people hear immigration, they think about the workforce. Just to give you a data point, in Virginia, I'm 66 years old. When I was born, 1 out of 100 Virginians had been born in another country, and we were bottom quarter per capita income. Today, 1 out of 7 Virginians was born in another country, and we're top quarter per capita income. I think there's only 2 states in my lifetime that have moved from bottom quarter to top quarter. North Dakota, well, they discovered oil, though. I mean, you know, that's really cool. Virginia didn't discover anything except that if you take down the artificial barriers that humans erect between each other or over the top of each other to keep people from being all they can be, you can be really successful. When I was born, you couldn't go to a school with a kid whose skin color was different. Most women couldn't go to most of our state universities, and we were not that welcoming to people from other parts of the world. There's nothing we're doing we can't do better in Virginia, but we've become a more welcoming and inclusive place that recognizes the talents of all, that celebrates the talents of all, that attracts the talents of all. And if you do that, then you start to attract the businesses and the institutions and organizations who want to be around talented people. The Virginia experience tells me that a comprehensive immigration reform that focuses on the workforce will have an enormous upside for this nation. And it's one of the few things that the Congressional Budget Office says can actually increase GDP without adding a penny to the national debt. In addition to addressing workforce challenges, we need to get better at sustaining the fleet that we already have. GAO released a report last week. I know you've all grappled with it. It's been covered in proceedings, highlighting that fully half of the Navy's amphibious fleet is in poor condition. Some ships have been available for years at a time. This has been a headache producer, I know, for you, Carlos, during your tenure as Secretary of the Navy. An article published in Proceedings earlier this year, more than a third of the nation's attack submarines are in extended maintenance availabilities at a given time. Congress has been in an annual struggle with the Navy in recent years to decide this hard question: does it make sense to decommission ships that have been poorly maintained, or to continue to spend resources on keeping them limping along? This kind of a dilemma isn't unsustainable, and we need to figure out how to maintain the Navy during peacetime so that it's ready, God forbid, but it's ready in wartime. The ability to sustain and maintain the fleet does go back to some of the workforce challenges I mentioned, but it's also bigger than that. It is also in the planning and budgeting side, and it's going to be very, very critical to the success of the naval forces during any time of conflict. The Houthis are an example of the kind of threat we're bound to face in the years ahead. Non-state actor, funded and equipped by Iran. They've held international shipping in the Red Sea at risk for over a year, causing massive disruption to global markets, significant price increases on everyday products, utilizing weaponry that is infinitesimally small in price compared to the weapons we have to array against it to defeat the threat to U.S. forces and to commercial shipping. Imagine the level of threat that not the Houthis but China would pose to merchant shipping and military vessels during a potential crisis in the Indo-Pacific. So we've got to work to secure supply chains, build up the workforce in the way I've described, and ensure that we're able to get our service members where they need, when they need to be, whatever that may be in the world. And if the security environment is so challenging that we can't support them from the U.S., then we need to ensure that they can obtain necessary support from our allies and partners. I do believe the pivot, the long-discussed pivot or focus on the Indo-Pacific is the right focus. But obviously the inadequacy of land presence in the Indo-Pacific and the miles and miles of open water mean that we have got to be very focused on pre-positioning as much as we can. But also it's going to be a powerful time for investments in Navy and Marine. You know, I didn't serve in the military. I do have a son who's was 8 years active and now a Marine reservist. So everything I know, I kind of put into my own terms. I call Navy and Marine flexible force. We need flexible force more than we need fixed force right now. Navy, Marines are flexible force. But to be effectively flexible, we do have to find partners where we can pre-position assets that might be needed. And that includes the maintenance of our Navy vessels. My shipbuilders in Hampton Roads, they want all the maintenance to be done in Virginia, obviously, and I get that. And yet there's often a whole lot of reasons why we ought to be looking at high-quality maintenance in places around the world. First, if you can get the maintenance done, you know, closer to the potential theater of conflict rather than coming back home, that's good for defense. Second, it's also often good diplomatically. You know, Spain, as an example, was a nation that had a lot of wariness about NATO for decades and decades. But the presence of the U.S. Navy in Rota and the use of the Navantia shipyard in Rota to help do maintenance actually produces economic benefits in Spain that make them a much more willing and reliable partner in NATO and other missions. I remember being in Rota once and talking to some of our sailors aboard one of the vessels I was visiting. I said, so how are these Spanish shipbuilders at Navantia doing these maintenance availabilities? And the guy said to me, hey, they built the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They know what they're doing. So I think, you know, building out these relationships with shipbuilders and ship maintenance around the world with our allies is a very important thing. In a period of crisis or conflict, we've got to be prepared to repair and rearm vessels away from our own shores. And this just isn't a Navy asset. We're realizing, for example, in Ukraine, the dangers of having to rely on massive production of 155 rounds in the United States that then can get shipped to a theater battle. There's a lot of military assets that need to be produced in places closer to where conflict might occur. The thing that I'll finish with, having talked about maintenance and having talked about workforce, is allies. Our people and our platforms are our main and the support of the American people are our main assets. But I would say a very close second is the deep alliances and friendships and the global goodwill that we've built across generations. This is the thing that we have that our adversaries don't. They're trying to replicate it. You know, when a Xi Jinping watches Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion into the Ukraine, and Putin has assured him that this is going to be a few days mopping up operation, and instead NATO strategy snaps together like tinker toys to impose consequences that thwart Vladimir Putin's ambition. Xi Jinping sees the alliances that the United States have and asks himself the question, why don't we have that? China, Iran, North Korea, Russia are growing closer and closer. I will say I think U.S. policymakers for years underestimated the abilities of these four nations to cooperate because they viewed histories of enmity or border challenges between them as imposing some kind of a permanent cap on their ability to cooperate. And that was foolish and naive to believe that we needn't worry about the combined efforts of these nations, because we now see they're watching what we're doing. They're seeing the value of NATO, of AUKUS, of the Quad, and they're working quickly to replicate it. And yet they are still far behind us in the ability to do this effectively. The revitalization of NATO in the last few years, the growth of NATO to add Finland and Sweden, two very capable militaries. I'm really proud that the Virginia Guard is now partnering with Finland after Finland's succession to NATO in the State Partnership Program, hoping to visit them soon. But this network of alliances that we have, which will be critical in the Indo-Pacific, is something that we need to always maintain and advance. A few days ago, we recognized the 83rd anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. We can't fully repay the debt we owe to the Americans who served in past wars, but we can do the best job we can to preserve the world that they fought to create. If you need any proof that American leadership in the world works, just look at the system of partnerships and alliances we've helped develop since World War II. There's a beautiful biblical phrase, to beat swords into plowshares. You know, that's a kind of a cool phrase. What does that mean in practice? Japan and Germany are some of our closest allies. I mean, we've beaten swords into plowshares, and so have they. A nation like Vietnam, where we lost tens of thousands of lives and they lost hundreds of thousands of lives in a war in my lifetime, we are increasingly cooperating with Vietnam on military-to-military and defense issues because of their and our shared concern about Chinese dominance in the region. The alliances we have, even with nations that were adversaries, is a tribute to American magnanimity, but it's also a tribute to the magnanimity of these other nations. And it's also a tribute to our ability to step back from whatever history may have been and look at new challenges that we face together and find common cause. I'm very excited about the recent set of really strategic alliances that the Biden administration has worked to forge in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad existed, the Biden administration, but I think work has been done to strengthen that alliance. The AUKUS framework, I think, poses a significant upside opportunity for all of us to promote stability in the Indo-Pacific. I worked very hard as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee and the Armed Services Committee to get the implementing language of AUKUS in last year's defense bill. We had to get it through the Foreign Relations Committee first and then bolt it onto the defense bill, but we made it work. And that, of all the things that China worries about, they're worried more about AUKUS than they are about any particular weapons platform. The growing U.S. mill-to-mill relationship and civilian relationship with the Philippines under President Marcos has been a very important thing. The work that President Biden did to help promote more of a civilian rapprochement between the governments of South Korea and Japan is very positive. The mill-to-mill relationship was strong, but it was always somewhat capped by the difficulty of the civilian governments to work closely together because of the history that is still so real there. But we're moving forward in that area as well. Celebrating NATO's 75th over the summer was kind of an indication of the fact that these alliances really matter. They give us a strategic edge. Of the many things that I'm concerned about the incoming administration, it's the attitude toward alliances that is one of the big question marks that I am concerned about. These are the networks that have created, that will ensure the ability of free and open Indo-Pacific to cooperate to keep Chinese aggression at bay and to build up the success, economic and military success of our partner nations. The partnerships that we've woven together are a true competitive edge that we still have over adversaries and that we need to maintain. And I'm going to do everything I can. I consider myself very fortunate. It's rare in the Senate to be on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee. I remember I came to the Senate 2013, and you're a newbie and you're supposed to go to your then party leader, Harry Reid, and ask for committees. I said, I'd love to be on Armed Services. And he said, you will be. You're from Virginia. There's always been a Virginia in Armed Services. Jim Webb is leaving. You got a kid in the Marine. You're going to be on Armed Services. Great, I'm 1 for 1. Then I said, okay, I'd like to be on the Help Committee. He goes, that's not going to happen. I waited for an explanation. None was forthcoming. 4 years later, I got on the Help Committee. But then I said, I want to be on the Foreign Relations Committee. He said, we don't put people in Armed Services and Foreign Relations. We put you on one or the other. I said, well, can I make a case? He goes, okay, fire away. I said, listen, Armed Services, you understand, I'm going to be on Armed Services. Foreign Relations, I'm fluent in Spanish. I was a missionary in Honduras. 45 million people want to get their news in Spanish every day. Let me go on Foreign Relations where you don't have enough attention on the Americas. I will do that, and I'll be able to speak to a population that's really important. He goes, that's a good argument, counselor. I'm going to take that under advisement. But it's turned out to be great. I was able to be on Foreign Relations. So many of the things that we might think of as military alliances, they don't go through the Armed Services Committee. They go through the Foreign Relations Committee. And being able to be at the nexus of diplomacy and military preparedness and operations has been, frankly, the best part of my 12 years in the Senate. And I suspect it's going to be the best part of my next chunk of time in the Senate as well. Thanks for everything you do. We'll be coming to you for asks. And maybe I'll just conclude here. We will need to do an immigration reform bill. It'll have to be workforce-based. It will only happen if it's bipartisan. We had a bipartisan bill on the floor in 2013, and it was supported by a tepid majority that got beaten by a loud minority. And I learned a lesson in 2013 that I've learned often in politics since I got elected to City Council in 1994. A loud minority can beat a tepid majority every time. At some point in the next Congress, I believe we will have an immigration reform bill on the table that will be driven by the low unemployment rate and the need to meet the nation's workforce needs, including the workforce needs of our ship and subbuilding industry. At some point, we'll have it. If it's a partisan bill, I'm not going to bother to come and asking you for help because there's no way a partisan bill is going to pass. But if it's a bipartisan bill, I'm going to come to every interest group I know and say, okay, we had the majority last time, not Dem v. our majority, but a majority of the outside stakeholders wanting to get immigration reform bill done, and we didn't get it done in 2013. Let's now make sure that our majority, recognizing that we need to do this for the nation's workforce, is loud, not tepid, and let's get it done. And you can play a very critical role in that when the time is right, and I hope that day comes, and I look forward to working with you on it when it does come. Thanks so much.
We have time for one question, if there's one question. Yes, sir, over here.
Thank you, Ben Massengale from the Simpson Center. Thank you for taking this question. A lot has been made about the need for improving our labor force and modernizing our shipyards. The previous speakers have made a big effort about that, and rightfully so, given that's the best investment for the short term. But the number of shipyards, civilian and military, my focus is primarily civilian, and repair yards has only gone down since the 80s. Yeah. What effort has the committee or Congress received information to say, hey, what can we do to raise the number or build new shipyards, given those are going to be at least a 5-year process till you can get that? That's going to span over multiple terms, even if it's outside Virginia.
Yeah, I'm going to be real blunt. Within the committee, there has been, this issue has been raised, but there's been very little discussion of new shipyards. There's been discussion of, can we grow the ones we have? You know, how can we both grow them in terms of land mass, grow them in terms of capital investment, grow them in terms of employment? But we've had very little discussion about, are there need for new? I think you're going to see that discussion probably start to go live as we, we'll get this NDA done, and then we're immediately working on the next one. Without really predicting about where the discussion is going to go, we have to do some things very differently to meet the needs. For a number of years, I think we've been of the position that, We just need to do our best, and then at the end of the year, we'll seek an anomaly, and we got to spend more money. Just spending more money through anomalies ain't going to get us to where we need to go. We have to do things differently, and that is a kind of a live question that's on the table that I suspect you'll see us start to address. But we haven't addressed it in a meaningful way during the time I've been on the committee. Yep.
Senator, if you'd stand by for a minute, I'm going to ask the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, to come up for a special presentation.
I know senators don't like to be surprised, but you don't have any choice, Senator. First, for the record, let me say that we did not coordinate our talking points at all between our offices. But I think you've just witnessed firsthand how Senator Kaine has mastered the issues that are at play in our Navy and our Marine Corps, certainly over the time that I've been Secretary, but even well before then. And so, Senator, it is now my tremendous honor, on behalf of the entire Department of the Navy, to present this certificate award in appreciation of distinguished public service in the Department of the Navy, the Secretary of the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award to the Honorable Tim Kaine for services set forth in the following. For exceptional public service to the Department of the Navy as a member of Congress and the Senate Armed Services Committee from 2013 to 2024, Senator Kaine's dedicated service to our sailors and Marines ensured that they were provided the resources necessary to support and defend the nation's interests around the globe. His leadership, especially on personnel and readiness policy, focused on quality of service, quality of life, ensuring service member access to health care, child care, education. Senator Kaine's effort in support of the Australian-United Kingdom-United States Agreement, AUKUS, and the revitalization of the Defense Industrial Base to support shipbuilding have ensured that the Navy Marine Corps team remains the most capable force in history. With grateful appreciation for his many years of public service to the nation and his outstanding contributions to the Navy and the Marine Corps, the Honorable Tim Kaine is awarded the Department of the Navy Distinguished Public Service, signed, me, Secretary of the Navy.
Hey, wow. Charles, that really means a lot. Coming from you, that really means a lot. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you for indulging me.
That means so much. Wow. Thank you very much, very much. I told Carlos this means a tremendous amount under any circumstances, but from a longtime friend, even more. Thank you so very much.
And now, Senator, on behalf of the Naval Institute and the audience here today, we'd like to present you a small token of our appreciation, the book, The Neptune Factor by Dr. Nick Lambert, published by the Naval Institute Press. Sir, thanks for your time again today.
Absolutely. Appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
We'll now take a quick break and be back at April 11:20. Thank you.
Ken, how you doing? Good to see you. Yeah, we're out in the yard, you know, doing stuff. Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, that's perfect. Well, I'm getting up to speed as best I can. We're gonna plumb that right now. We'll see. Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Right. That's where my joint had. JP&E phase 2. Yeah. Yeah. No big deal. Oh, did you? Oh, yeah. That's one thing to say. That's good. How about that? I must have been like 25 or 30. Much bigger, much bigger. Yeah, all those sorts of things. It's got to be. I'm sorry, it's number 2. It's got to be number 2. I mean, it's just the way the sponsor, in this case, yeah, members of the Little Rock Nine, and they, you know, they could have used it as a flat show to talk about. Yeah. Yeah, but they took their experiences and they related it to the current day and improved it in a way that was sophisticated. Absolutely. I was there for the Massachusetts last year. That was my first time experiencing it. Really cool. Like exercise in American power.
Brian, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Bill.
How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you're better, much better. Yeah. Yeah, get a happy picture at the beginning.
Yeah, Mark 45, you know, 5-minute shows, proximity lasts much better than SM3.
That's a fact.
Right. That's right. You know, just need to maybe double the rate of fire that you can get out of that.
But that being said, certainly given the environment, there's no COs that say, well, let me let that threat get within Mark 45. Right. If you detect that threat within SM2 range, you're going to take a shot before it gets in.
Hi, John. Good to see you.
5-inch range.
It is a good one. Did in, you know, hundreds of thousands of words, right? Condenses it down, but it really, it's sort of deep. Are we on? I'm going to ask everyone to come back and take your seats, please. We're going to kick off this panel discussion in just a minute. Lots of empty chairs over here, folks. It's my pleasure to now introduce today's panel conversation, A View with Industry on the State of Shipbuilding. This panel will explore the current state of U.S. shipbuilding as the industry faces growing challenges. However, despite difficulties in commercial shipbuilding, the U.S. shipbuilding sector remains vital for national defense. Key topics in today's discussion will include aging shipyards, a shrinking workforce, and complex regulations that drive up production costs. To moderate this important conversation is Brian Clark, a retired Navy submariner and senior fellow and director for the Center for Defense Concepts and Technology at the Hudson Institute. Brian specializes in naval operations, electronic warfare, autonomous systems, and military strategy. Prior to joining the Hudson Institute, he was a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, where he led studies for the Department of Defense on emerging technologies and future warfare. Mr. Clark served previously as Special Assistant to the Chief of Naval Operations, where he contributed to strategy development and key initiatives in undersea warfare, electromagnetic spectrum operations, and personnel management. Please join me in welcoming Brian Clark as our panel moderator this morning.
All right, well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you all for being here and sticking around for the afternoon entertainment, or I guess the end of the day entertainment. I'm joined here on the stage by three leaders in the shipbuilding industry to talk about where we are with shipbuilding in the Navy, the challenges we face, the opportunities, and some of the ways forward to be able to build that future hybrid fleet that we keep hearing about. So with me are Eric Tuning, who is currently with the Huntington Ingalls Industries, or HII, where he's the Executive Vice President. Previous to this, he's been the Chief of Staff to the U.S. Secretary of Defense, as well as being Deputy Assistant Secretary for Industrial Policy. Also with us is Eric Snyder, who is Vice President for the Columbia Program over at General Dynamics Electric Boat, where he has been for a number of years, where he previously ran the Applied Physical Sciences Division as Chief Engineer, and also was at Naval Reactors for 34 years. But he's a pretty good guy, despite all the time at Naval Reactors. And then on the very end there, Mark Vandroff, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Fincantieri Marinette Marine up in Wisconsin. And before his time at Fincantieri Marinette Marine, he was Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Defense Policy on the National Security Council staff. And was also in the Navy, the Major Program Manager for the Arleigh Burke destroyers and Commanding Officer of Navy Surface Warfare Center at Carter Rock. We're not too far from here. So gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
To just kind of set the context, I think we all kind of know what's going on with Navy shipbuilding today. Many ship classes are late in being delivered, according to at least the timelines the Navy has set out. Particularly, frigate program's been challenged, Virginia class has been challenged, but there's challenges across the board in terms of Navy shipbuilding programs. The Navy hasn't made a lot of progress towards the hybrid fleet that we've been talking about, both in and out of the Navy for several years now. We haven't really made that pivot to start incorporating more uncrewed systems into the fleet. We haven't really rebalanced the fleet towards the larger numbers of smaller ships that we keep aspiring toward, so we can talk about why that hasn't happened. Some programs are working through some design issues. We've got some delays, both driven by the Navy, maybe some are driven by the industrial base. And then, unlike our foreign counterparts, we don't have a commercial shipbuilding industry we can tap into to gain capacity or expertise or to be able to amortize capital investments across. So the lack of a commercial shipbuilding industry in the U.S. is an impact that the U.S. Navy is unable to take advantage of. And then the last thing is we do have allied countries or companies in allied countries that want to help and have expressed a lot of interest in joining the U.S. shipbuilding industrial base. Some have made investments, some have merely made aspirations towards making those investments, but we can talk a little bit about how foreign and allied shipbuilders may be able to contribute to improving U.S. shipbuilding outcomes. So those are some of the things we'll want to talk about today, and I think I want to start off with kind of just the big picture challenge, which is we're unable to get most of our ship classes out on time, at least in the time frame that we wanted to. What do you see as some of the major factors there, and what are some of the ways you're trying to work through the kind of fundamental challenge of getting ships out on time? So Eric, I'll start with you.
Sure, happy to. First of all, it's great to be up here with Mark and Eric and Brian, thank you. Listen, there's a confluence of issues that we need to address. We've got to grow and retain a world-class workforce. We have to invest in new technologies to drive deck plate performance. We have to modernize our infrastructure and expand shipyard capacity, and we have to rebuild our supply chain. I think the biggest gating issue we're finding right now in our ability to do all of those things is that we're operating underneath an environment where the vast majority of our contracts were set with pre-COVID economics, right? So when you think about that, our cost structure was locked in with assumptions from about 2019. And so we need the flexibility and the headroom to make investments, to increase wages, to expand in the shipyards, to increase in those process technologies, to take advantage of the digital revolution. But to do that, we need mechanisms like SAWS, which enable us to create headroom on the contracting vehicles where we can reinvest to do expansion of the workforce, expansion of shipyard capacity, expansion of process technologies. Not having something like SAWS in place is the biggest single gating issue for our ability to get ships out on time.
Because you're always behind in terms of
You're
your
always behind,
investment.
and you need the investment headroom to get out in front of those things.
Eric?
Well, thank you to the Naval Institute for having us here. Proud to be here with fellow shipbuilders. And I would address also that specifically the workforce and building the workforce that we need to be able to deliver the ships like we expected to when we entered into those contracting schemes from the pre-COVID years is where we need to be. We spent across my career, we spent the better part of the last 3 decades as an enterprise shrinking. And because of peace dividend, whatever you want to call it, we spent 3 decades shrinking the entirety of the enterprise. And now we've thought about the fact that we need to grow, and we have taken some actions together as an enterprise to try to grow. But I'd say I don't think we've really faced into the enormity of the hole that we dug for ourselves over 3 decades. And so this is, I worry sometimes whenever we talk about workforce being an issue that can quickly get translated to the people. I want to be clear, 100% crystal clear, that the people we have coming into the shipyards these days are top-notch people who, and we can talk a little bit more later about the things that we're doing to make them ready to be in the shipyard. When they arrive in the shipyard, the time between arriving and actually doing productive work, we're shrinking that time. We're reaching as far as into the elementary schools to try to capture the minds of folks that shipbuilding is a noble craft to come and to go do. And I think the biggest thing about all of that is as leaders, we also have participated in that shrinking of the enterprise for the last 3 decades. And it's going to take leadership and new leadership, not new leadership ideas, new leading ideas about how to lead that workforce to produce what we're going to need them to produce. And certainly SAWS is a big piece of that.
Right. Yeah, Mark?
So let me try and add something new and different to the conversation, even though I would say pretty much if you had asked me first, I would have hit on a lot of the themes that the 2 Erics here have hit on. I see a lot of former surface and current surface warfare officers out in the audience. And whenever I explain shipbuilding now to a SWO, and I think this would work for the rest of the warfare communities within the Navy, I talk about the detect to engage sequence, because the SWO understands, hey, if I want to destroy a target, I have to go through an entire detect to engage sequence. A missile doesn't just slam into an enemy aircraft without a lot of steps. Shipbuilding, the missile slamming into the point of contact, where the analogy of the missile slamming into the enemy aircraft is that welder doing a weld, it's that electrician pulling a cable. But there is a detect to engage sequence behind that starts with design and various types of design, a functional design leading into a detailed design and a computer model, leading into a planning package, leading into a shipyard planning process that ends up producing work that an actual shipyard worker can do. We're very focused, and rightly so, about the bang at the end because we need more people at the bang. But we really need more and better talent, resources, processes throughout that entire detect to engage. So, right now, a lot of people were talking about the lead program in my yard, the frigate, which is a hot topic. One of the things we found is not only, do I need more people for, just like all my colleagues here building the ship, but the intellectual database on both the industry and government side to produce and check and approve that design, the bench there, because of 30 years of downsizing, is equally thin in places, and that becomes its own bottleneck so that you don't produce the functional design to the detailed design to the planning packages to even get in the hands of the workers that you don't have enough of in the beginning, right, to start with. But that all of that is thin, and that if we're going to be a nation that consistently produces new and innovative designs for maritime platforms, you got to look at the entire picture there. So not just who are you getting into welding and electrician trades, which are critical, but who are you getting into schools of naval architecture and marine engineering, and are you investing in the right design tools? Are you investing in the right, in order to create that entire detect to engage process that ends with someone actually building part of a ship?
It's a great point, Mark. So to pull the string on that a little bit for all of you, it seems like we've had this shift towards digitization in other warfare areas where we do a lot of digital design and we do the whole engineering process digitally, and there's a lot of virtualization of that and virtual machines, and that allows us to speed up the manufacturing process because it allows you to get visibility into the supply chain and orchestrate that whole detect to engage sequence digitally. Are we able to do that on the shipbuilding side to make that process more efficient, to get from the point of all the way back to the manufacturer of the equipment and the parts you're going to need, and start making sure that things are sequenced in the right way so that the ship can get built as fast as possible? Are we able to do that? So you can start with Mark. Yeah.
Sure. So I would say I'm pretty pleased with the tools that we have right now. One of the advantages for us being part, since Fincantieri Marinette Marine is a shipyard that's owned by a large global shipbuilding company that builds ships in Europe and Asia and South America. So we really benefit in a lot of cases from seeing what our colleagues around the world do and get improvement from that source of improvement. We have modern, sophisticated design tools for ships. So you have most everyone now is using Ship Constructor of some form around the world. It's become an industry standard. But Fincantieri has layered on its own proprietary tools on top of that that lets us do really good visualization, when really good understanding, really good tagging of all the different parts of all that. Getting that down through our supply chain so that our supply chain supports us in that, especially an American supply chain, that's the next level of sophistication that we need to reach down to.
Yeah. Eric, what about an electric boat?
Electric boat. We went into full-on digital design, first ever submarine design for modular construction with the Virginia class. And that tool from the early 90s served us well all the way up through 2009, 2010, and it is still serving us for the construction of the Virginia class submarines today. But for the Columbia class, we introduced a new tool through Team Center that has been a really powerful tool for us. It does require a lot of specific modifications for our applications, and we have struggled with the translation of the digital. We got the digital engineering design really good. The part that we're struggling the most with is the translation down into the welder striking an arc on the deck plate, and so that's it's not because of the tool. It's just because of our application and our ability to do that translation. Who's doing that translation? There's, as with everything, as Eric said at the beginning, there's a whole range of factors that come into that. There's not in any of these. There's not just one thing that you can put your finger on and say, go fix that thing, and everything will be better. But we're very well pleased with the tool that we have and the tools that we're going to be and we're going to continue to use that tool going forward.
Right. Yeah, I mean, listen, Industry 4.0 technologies have to be part of the solution to get us out of where we are, right? And so if we were to take this room, put you down on new carrier construction right now, you would see folks with the 3D model, on the deck plate using that for drawings, right? And Eric talked about work that's being done in Columbia. So I think that's part of the solution. I would say where we are relative to other industries, whether it's auto or commercial aerospace, is we're relatively nascent. And I think there's goodness there in that there's a lot of room to grow and advance, right? So a lot of headroom for us, particularly as you begin to think about the role of additive manufacturing and addressing bottlenecks we have in our supply chain. All that said, to fully leverage the benefits of these new technologies, you need investment and you need headroom in the contracts to go ahead and make those investments so we can begin to get those process efficiencies in place to accelerate production. And you need to be able to pay your workforce and the type of workforce that you want to retrain. We're all proud of our shipbuilders. They're great men and women, right? But you need to be able to train them in these new digital technologies.
So for that investment, I mean, I know that, actually I know all three of your shipyards have made your own investments in infrastructure and technology improvements. So it's not a matter of you're looking for a handout, I think, from the government to do this. But to what degree does the government, does the Navy need to make some of these investments independent of what might be allotted for in a particular contract?
So I think there's a couple ways to think about it. So one is, over half of our capital allocation that we do when you think about stakeholder investments in either share purchases or dividend payments or capital in the shipyard, over half of it is in capital in the shipyard, right? So, and that's higher for shipbuilding than it is to other defense verticals within the defense ecosystem. So we're investing a lot of money in this right now ourselves. MID projects are funded to help accelerate these efforts as well. I think to Eric's earlier point, we have dramatically as a country underestimated the investment necessary to dig ourselves out of the hole we put ourselves in when we allowed the industry to consolidate the way it did in 1993, 1994, right? And so now we are trying to build our way out of that, literally and figuratively, through a series of investments, and it's going to take sustained investment to undo choices that were made over the past 30 years.
Right. So the Navy's got efforts underway to help the nuclear and particularly the submarine industrial base, so the Blue Forge Alliance, you're using consulting firms like Deloitte to divide money up among the submarine industrial base. Mark, should we be making those kinds of investments in other parts of the shipbuilding industrial base as well?
So that's a leading question. Because as the surface ship guy here, I'm gonna jump up and down and say yes. I will say over the last couple of years, Congress has been very helpful. They've added industrial base funding for the frigate program, and we have made what I believe is good use of that, especially in some of the initiatives we've done with our workforce. So we can't, statutorily, we can't just use that money to say, here's a higher salary. But we have used it for training and retention efforts. So one of the things I was really pleased to announce yesterday to my workforce is starting in 2025, we're going to be providing $5,000 a year child tax credit for daycare expenses for any employee who has daycare expenses, goes through a process, and we'll be able to subsidize tax-free to them up to $5,000. And the Navy has helped us sharing the ability to get to that. A couple of other things where recently we've looked and talked about automation and enabling our workforce to be more effective. For our painters and for our welders, we've looked at exoskeletons both produced here and produced in Europe. We've done comparisons with what our sister yards in Fincantieri in Italy are doing. And then the Navy has partnered with us to make some investments in those exoskeletons so that we will make each worker more efficient. They'll be able to bear weight more easily while they're working overhead. And so that's just another example of, one, having the worldwide reach to be able to see what's out there in the market potentially, and then working with the Navy to realize the investment. And that's something that Congress has provided over the couple of years. We hope to be able to do more of that in the future. But as Eric was saying, support for the workforce in general is certainly will be a key component of having a suitably sized, suitably retained workforce. But like I said, some of those have already started to go. And I would just say on the subject of talking about investment, I'd be amiss if I hadn't talked about what our parent company has invested in Wisconsin. We built new buildings where I can build 2 entire frigates undercover, really big building, but I can build them all within a building. ships start as panels, and we now have a panel line that, you know, if you had been at my company 4 or 5 years ago, our panel line would have been, you know, this, you know, rolling line with about 24 to 30 welders and interior cranes and people doing flipping of panels by hand. And we looked at what the cruise shipyards were doing over in Italy, and now my panel line is about 16 robots, a couple of welders and a couple of operators on a brand new panel line producing the frigate panels. And then we invested in, we went beyond having a graving dock or having a floating dock, but for the frigate now we actually have a modern synchro ship lift, and that lift capability, I can get 10,000 tons worth of ship in and out of the water without the, I'll call it the hassle of a floating dry dock, which when you own a floating dry dock, you're basically, as a shipyard, deciding to take care of a ship yourself, right? Because that floating dry dock is as much of a maintenance. And you know, the modern ship lifts that you see down in Australia, over in Europe, now we've brought that capability to the United States.
So, you've all made investments in your shipyards, and then the Navy's making other investments in the shipbuilding industrial base. NAVSEA's not here, so we can pick on them. Do you get the impression that there's an effort to try to orchestrate or to figure out which investments are the most valuable in terms of advancing ship production? Because it comes across as a little bit ad hoc. Like we've got Blue Forge Alliance, and we've got Deloitte throwing money around the industrial base. We've got the shipbuilders making their own investments. Do you get a sense that there's an effort to coordinate or to at least prioritize where the investment dollars are most effectively spent, or are we kind of all entrepreneurial in how we're doing this?
Let me take that and let me address it in two parts. So part one is, I can tell you for a fact, we have a model, my team runs it, right? Where we look across capital investments for both our shipyards, and we understand which investment from outside funding would give us the highest return from a throughput perspective. So I feel very comfortable about kind of our analytical underpinning from that. You broaden the aperture. So in the Trump administration, I led the 13806 report, which was the most comprehensive review of the defense industrial base since the Eisenhower administration. And what you found was true across defense verticals, right? There was a lack of multi-tier supply chain visibility, right, in every defense vertical.
Right.
And then once you got into the second or third tier of the supply chain, it became very clear that a critical supplier was probably sole sourced to 5 separate programs under different primes, right? And so I think to the spirit of your question, both DoD and the shipbuilders are owners of the ecosystem that underpins the industrial base. And so as we make investments, it's appropriate for other stakeholders to look in the sub-tier to make investments that open the aperture across the board. They just need to be coordinated, right? And we've got mechanisms in place to make sure that coordination occurs.
Yeah.
And since you mentioned NAVSEA, I don't know if anyone from NAVSEA is here, but I'll pile on. You talk about the ecosystem, alumni. Good to see you, Admiral. But the alumni. One of the things I've learned working now for Fincantieri is to what extent we drive our own singularities into our defense industrial base down there. We have, and I'll just use it because it's kind of top of my mind. And everyone here uses this, right? For a lot of the high voltage cable that goes on ships and submarines, there is a NATO standard for that is different from the American standard. If we use the NATO standard, there's several European companies we could buy cable from. With the American standard, you've taken everyone else out of the market because our standard is just enough different that it's not worth those international cable suppliers. And I use that only not to pick on the cable, and God forbid, not to pick on the American makers of cable, it's a wonderful company. But it's an example of where one set of specifications drives, then that's the one guy who can make it. And it's not just cable. You could point to many different component systems, commodities within shipbuilding where our standards, right, wrong, or indifferent, are different than everybody else's standards in the world. And if we want them to stay different, then everyone should realize with clear eyes that we are paying premium for that. If we want them to change, then we should do that with clear eye and understand what might we be giving up in some area of performance. But right now, in many cases, my sense is we do it because we've always done it that way and we think we can, and those are our standards and we love them.
Right.
And I say that, you mentioned I'm the former commanding officer of Carter Rock, so I had a command whose job it was to come up with those standards and validate those standards. And I always, when I was CEO of Carter Rock, believed that they were serving us well, and I think they generally serve us well, but that's also an area that's worth a scrub of, would flexibility there help us broaden out that base and therefore reduce those cycle times?
I think that it's not it may sound contrary, but it won't be. It's not. I don't mean it to be contrary. For submarines, standards were standards grew out of learning across not just World War II, but the loss of the Thresher and the loss of Scorpion as well. And I believe that the standards that we have are good standards. I believe that those standards were created and used across the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe a little bit into the 90s by folks who wrote them and understood what they meant and understood why they said what they said. And I think that as we talked about everybody else shrinking, I'm not picking on the Navy. This thing about experience at the cold face, whatever your piece of the cold face is, it goes everywhere. And so I think not of their own, not a fault of their own, but the folks that are that are enforcing those standards these days don't have the benefit of understanding everything about why they are the way they are. And I think that it's not an Achilles heel at all, but I think it's something that we need to work on, trying to figure out how to employ the standards, at least for submarines. How do we employ the standards that we have and understand the basis for them, while also being always open to new ideas and to be able to learn from others. But it's the criticality for me, and I think I did 6 sea trials, alpha sea trials, first dive to test depth and that sort of thing. And the underpinning of all of that is critical to the continued success.
Yeah, the father of Aegis, Wayne E. Meyer, once told me, this was after he had retired, but I was working at NAVSEA and he gave me some fatherly advice. He said, you can always take down a fence as long as you know why you put it up to begin with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe just to build on that point, I think what's interesting now is how do these standards apply as we think about new technologies, right? So talk about additive, right? We have a lot of standards that are addressed for existing process technologies. Then you get into something like 3D printing. And you say, okay, well, how do I apply that existing standard to a new process technology? And how quickly am I driving adoption of that new process technology to address the fact that, to Mark's point, I only have one supplier who does this thing because the business case for the industry structure is only one person to do that. Right. But if I can do additive, then I can do that in the shipyard, right, to help expand the supply base. And I think that's an interesting conversation around how we think about the role of releasing technology standards for new processes and looking at that trade-off as it drives throughput enhancement.
If I could just catch up for a second, Brian, on the investment. The investment from the Navy, the Congress, and from all of our corporations is dreadfully needed. We've put General Dynamics has put over $5 billion into facilities, workforce, equipment, and all of that sort of thing to be able to underpin at least the beginning of the growth that we're seeing. And while those investments are so critically needed, I think the ability to look into the industrial base, and we have teams of people that work on a daily basis looking into all first tier, sub tiers,
Right.
all of that, to figure out where are their weak points, and trying to figure out what investments can and should we do to be able to underpin them. While that's important, I like to say I'm a card carrying capitalist, and I kind of feel like breaking the paradigm of how many ship sets of material, for example, that we can buy is something that is a challenge that we all ought to get behind. For instance, for the Columbia class specifically, I know we're going to buy at least 12 copies of that submarine. Yet I can only buy the next 5 years worth of material, and so I know folks don't want to commit future administrations and Congresses to this thing, but are they really going to turn up and say we're not going to do these ships?
Right.
So I think there's some opportunity in paradigm thinking around investments and how the investments get made.
Yeah, it seems like there could be better coordination between the different parties that are making these investments in the industrial base and in the shipyards themselves, right? Because I think that it just seems from the outside like there's a lot of money moving, and it's not necessarily being organized in a coherent way across all the players.
And the quickest way to see return on investment, which is the other thing that we constantly get questioned, well, we've put in all this money, when am I going to see the return on investment? We're working on the front end of this whole value stream, and it's going to take time. It's appropriate and proper to invest in the beginning of it, but it's going to take time for that to work its way through the snake.
And I'd say, Brian, I wouldn't call it uncoordinated. I think it is coordinated. I think it's a federated approach, right? So you've got multiple actors participating, but I think that is our model. We have a federated approach for how we address these kind of problems. But I do think there's good coordination, and I think the investments that Congress and the Navy have made have been important. The investments the shipyard's making is important. And I think ultimately it really needs to be about how do we uplift the ecosystem as a whole.
Right.
And that requires sort of the team effort, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're on the early part of that now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to follow up on one of the things that you brought up, Mark, the idea of standards and the role of technical warrant holders and all of that in driving the design of ships. Obviously, this has been a challenge with the frigate, is adapting to the standards that were being used in the U.S. Navy. So there are processes for adopting new standards, but it seems like those are probably not adequately resourced. The process by which we would analyze a new standard to assess its utility. Do we need to think about putting money into that process to try to revise standards that were designed around analog analysis?
Yeah, both sides, and then I'll use another one of my favorite examples from the frigate program, and so you make a ship out of steel. Steel just sitting there isn't it's kind of floppy when you make it in something, so you have to stiffen it. And if you went to any other surface ship in any other Navy, you would see that the steel in a panel is generally going to be stiffened with a single line of steel that comes out into a bulb and might be flat on one side and goes by the name a bulb flat. In the U.S. Navy, that piece of steel has another piece of steel in a T-type shape and is known as a structural T. And that seems really trivial, but over the course of something the size of a destroyer or frigate, you're talking about dozens of tons of weight of steel, of extra weight of steel, and the T is much harder to fabricate and weld in, so you're adding both cost and labor hours. And if you went to my former colleagues at Carderock, they would show you all the data on blast resistance and wave resistance, and they would show the difference, and they would say the T is better.
Right.
And so that's where we get our standards from. Right. As we're looking and we want a bigger fleet, we want to expand all that, I would want the Navy corporately, one, to make sure that it's got an adequate technical base, right? And as everything shrunk, the Navy's technical base has shrunk, so that if someone comes up with well, I've got a compromise. Why don't we do some T's and some other stuff and then look at that, and is that going to actually be good enough? The Navy is intellectually open to that, but from being resourced to consider it at the fullness that the way the Navy wants to consider anytime they make a technical change, that ends up being a pretty slow process.
Right.
And then from a value stream, and I've got friends who would argue that in the age of hypersonic missiles, the differential of quality that something like that gives you may or may not be, the juice may not be worth the squeeze. And again, I'm taking one little example.
Yeah.
You could go through the entire, the build spec of a frigate is about 2,000 pages. So I could go through all 2,000 pages of those specifications and say, is this really what we want to do? And if the answer is yes, then God bless America, industry will go do that.
Right.
I just think that needs to be, I think that decision needs to be a little bit more mindful, right, or a little bit more realized as we go forward, not just from the programs that I'm involved with, but I'm talking about in general. Eric Labs, who might still be here, okay, talked about that he would like to have seen an LUSV that is optionally manable, right? So that would be great because then you'd be flexible, all that. And when he said that, all the blood drained out of my, and I just was ready to fall. The advantage of putting a U in front of something is I end the debate on how much of that survivability and all those standards is necessary, right? If you're going to tell me that, okay, everything we do for test depth, because I'm going to put 100, 110 of America's finest sailors on a submarine, I'm going to take it below. We can't take risk, right? When other navies take risk, they end up with crunched submarines. We're going to know perfectly so that when they go to test depth, we know they're coming back. I'm there for you. When the coal happens, when something like the coal happens and a ship takes a blast nearby in port, right, that ship doesn't sink, it stays floating because they were stiffened with T's and not bulb flats. I'm with you on that. If you tell me you want something optionally manned, then I'm going to take all of those things that should be getting cost out of our unmanned platforms and should be making our unmanned platforms much easier to build, because now I don't care about that. I don't have any precious sailors there. I'm just trying to get something out in mass with capability, and if it gets itself blown up, I'll make another, right? But if you make it optionally manned, I can only build it one way, and do I optionally put all of that goodness that we do because it's carrying our precious sailors there? I'm now done with my rant. But that was when Eric said that, I said, ugh, because I've heard that before, and it's like, I don't think people always appreciate how much of the cost and craft and time of the ships we build go in making it suitable for our sailors to be on them, which is one of the great promises of going to unmanned systems. It's not just that there won't be people on it, and okay, it's because you can take so much cost out of it because now I don't have to worry about all those things we do to make it safe for our sailors and survivable for the sailors that we put on those platforms.
So Mark, a great rant, by the way. But
Rant done.
So the question that raises, though, is that if we want things to be fully uncrewed, they probably can't be as large as the LUSV was intended to be. So we shift to a set of smaller systems.
Maybe not. You could uncrew something that size and just pack. You increase your mission capability, right? It's more missiles. It's more sensors.
You got to get in and out of port, though. I mean, so you might have to figure out a way to handle that. But but it becomes expensive, right? It turns into a relatively big, expensive thing, and then at what point do you say, well, is it worth not having people on here if it's going to be a $400 million ship that is now going to be more or less like a combatant? So if we see going to smaller uncrewed systems as the way to go in terms of building out the hybrid fleet, is that something we need to have a whole new class of shipbuilders to produce if we're going to do it at the kinds of scale that the Navy aspires to do? Or is that something we try to feather into our existing shipbuilding industrial base here in the U.S.? Eric, you guys do both this.
So we're obviously America's largest military shipyard. We also are the largest producer of UUV capability, right? So you do both. I think to answer that question, you have to first answer the question that says, well, what's the role of unmanned capability in my force structure?
Yeah.
And how big is it going to be? Because do I need an industry that's going to be scaled to support 200 ships, or do I need an industry that's going to be scaled to support 5? Right. You know what I mean? And that I think drives the question. It says it doesn't need to be specialized, or does it not to be specialized? could you make an argument that says if we are going to have 100, then that'll naturally lead to the evolution of a specialized shipyard because, as Mark pointed out, I don't need all of the requirements that I need for a manned shipyard, which means I can do it more efficiently and I'll economize myself to do it? I think yes, but you need that demand signal in place first. Right. And until you have that demand signal, you're not going to know the answer to the question because the industry won't know how to organize. Right.
And I think you need that demand signal. You need to figure out how industry should organize, and I do think we don't want to. You start with a clean sheet of paper, but I think you need to bring folks along who are familiar with how we got, still familiar with how we got to where we are. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a 60-year-old guy about to phase out. That's not. But I do think you need to you need to bring that knowledge along to the new part.
And what I'll say about the first, when it comes to, if you're going to change that fleet force structure and you need different yards, to a certain extent, to quote Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come, right? The industry will shape itself to the new demand signal. But one of the things in my experience when I got the privilege of serving at the National Security Council, and I got to see more of the DoD than just the Navy that I was very familiar with, and I saw more of what the other services contribute, what their challenges and capabilities were. I came away with the philosophy of what I call wide and deep, right? What do you need to solve a given problem? And the answer is yes. In the chaos of the world, you will never know exactly what itch you need to scratch. So the future, you need manned platforms, you need unmanned platforms. You need high and you need low, and you need it across all your different domains. You need it across the maritime and the air and the space and the land domains at scale at different points, because whatever you think the future is going to be, it's going to be something different. So you need wide ranges of capability across lots of different levels. And so there's absolutely, in the hybrid, there's a role for a lot of different unmanned capability, and that doesn't mean that the manned capability will suddenly go away, because as soon as you do that, the need that manned capability was fulfilling will pop back up its head and say, I need you to do this, and you just got rid of it.
Right. Yeah, so and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience here in a minute. So if you have questions, start thinking of those and then positioning yourself over by the microphones. But you bring up a good point here as we try to evolve towards a hybrid fleet. And we do need to bring in maybe a greater diversity of shipbuilders that maybe specialize in some of these other platforms. What's the role of foreign or allied shipbuilders? We've got Hanwha and Hyundai making investments in the United States or looking to make investments in U.S. shipyards. Obviously, Fincantieri is the owner of Fincantieri Marinette Marine. Austal USA is part of Austal in Australia. To what degree can these foreign shipbuilders and ship repair providers help out with some of these challenges? Should they focus on the new ship classes that are maybe different than what we're already building? What role can they play in trying to improve shipbuilding outcomes?
So maybe there's two layers to this, right? I think the first layer is like economically, geoeconomically, the commercial shipbuilding industry and the economics associated with it are just distorted by Chinese industrial policy, right? So the reason why China has massive over-industrial capacity in shipbuilding is because there's an industrial policy in China that says, as an export-driven economy, we're going to drive down artificially low the cost of shipping containers because it helps lift the rest of the economy. Okay. Other export-driven economies, Japanese and the Koreans in particular, had to follow suit, so their governments had to massively subsidize commercial shipbuilding in their countries to kind of keep pace. Shipbuilding left the United States because we didn't do that. Right. Not saying that was right or wrong, just the reality, right? And so it left, and you kept Jones Act in as a basic kind of parameter. Okay, so now you're in a situation that says, all right, Korean and Japanese shipyards, are you going to come to the United States and help build? The minute they do, they will absorb all the cost associated with building ships in the United States. So we should not assume that they're going to be radically more efficient because they will be dealing with all the same factors we just talked about operating here. So then I think the question then becomes, can you leverage capability that they have in their home countries, modernization, in theater support, that sort of thing, or like something right now we're doing in support of AUKUS, we're proactively qualifying Australian suppliers to then help address bottlenecks we're having in our supply chain as it relates to Virginia-class submarines, doing that in partnership with Electric Boat, to help address not only our bottlenecks, but then also help prepare the Australians for kind of their optimal pathway as they take on that capability. Right.
And we are currently using Austal, the American side of Austal in Alabama to build structures for Virginia-class submarines and the Columbia submarine. Our objective is to get them as a focus factory. Dr. Labs mentioned this morning. They're a focus factory that we hope to get them to be able to outfit those decks, join those decks, paint those decks, outfit those decks, just like a piece of our own shipyard will be able to do. So we are currently nipping at the edges of that. I would say also that to the point that Eric made about are there capabilities, are there ideas, are there what can we mine from a more diverse playing field, playing board of shipbuilding expertise, and we certainly welcome that ability.
So one of the things that I get to do in my job that I enjoy, I do lots of things in my job that I enjoy, but I get to explain Fincantieri internationally to an American audience. And Fincantieri is a fascinating company. It's the largest shipbuilder in the world that isn't in Korea, Japan, or the People's Republic of China. And you talked about subsidizing and the building of container ships. You won't see a Fincantieri built container ship because that's not our market. We build ships that require a highly skilled, highly technical workforce to get them built. Ships where the quality and the complexity of the ship is a discriminator for the customer. And it turns out, and with all due respect to my submarine colleagues, a cruise ship might be the most complicated thing that's built on the seas today, right? I mean, it is extremely, and I've got lots of sea stories I'll tell later at the end about how complicated it is to build cruise ships. One of the things that's been benefit for us, being, having the parent company of Fincantieri, is the knowledge they've gained in welding techniques, in deck straightening, in things like panel lines, right? We get to take that, we get to use that and adapt it to the goodness of building ships for our U.S. and specifically U.S. Navy customers. The downside, right, and I was, if you're a foreign company and you're going to make a direct investment, you're going to do what Fincantieri did, right. Because Fincantieri strategically values the U.S. market. But to do that, first you're going to get hit with CFIUS. So we're going to say, all right, we're going to have a long process to see, can you even buy into the United States? Then, if you do business with DOD, you're going to have to go through FOCI mitigation, which is why I am somewhat ridiculously titled as the CEO of Fincantieri Marinette Marine, because in any other company I would be a VP GM, right? I'm not controlling, but because of FOCI, my little yard, which is one of many, many Fincantieri yards, many of which are much bigger than me, but mine has to be separately incorporated with a separate board of directors with a certain number of the members approved by DOD so that the FOCI is mitigated, so that we function as an independent entity, although owned majority by the parent company. So we have that FOCI mitigation. Then once you actually start building a warship for the United States, I can't go talk to any of my Italian or Norwegian colleagues about the thing that I'm building, even if they gave me a parent design without an ITAR license, which is not the easiest thing to get, although I will have to credit, he's not here to credit, but Secretary Del Toro has worked to make our ability to collaborate, he's applied secretarial level pressure to make our ability to collaborate with our foreign colleagues on the programs that we're executing better and get those ITAR permissions, but it is still a lengthy and somewhat bureaucratic process. So if we want foreign knowledge and foreign investment from our allies to do this together, AUKUS is a great model. We need to take AUKUS and expand it, not just to Australia and the UK, but to other key allies and partners in the maritime space, like Italy, like Japan, like the Republic of Korea, that are trusted, and then expand the circle of what we will and won't share technologically to a standard that makes it easier to kind of fully realize the benefit of those allied partners.
Thanks, Mark. So we have time for a couple questions. So Admiral, you start.
Well, first, thank you all it's a great panel, really good discussion. I have two short rants and one question. Rant one. So Mark, when you spoke of going through the 2,000-page ship spec for the frigate, we did that twice on Virginia class, once for Block 1 and once for Block 3, right? And that's how we actually got the program going in the first place, because we were able to pull a tremendous amount of cost out of it. You're kind of paying the price for that on the back end, because now as we go to overhaul those ships, as they come into their first overhaul cycle, you can't get parts because all that commercial stuff we use, the supplier's out of business. There's intellectual property that we can't get back. We can't manufacture stuff in the shipyards that maybe we could have 40 years ago. So there's a real problem on the back end of that, and I'd welcome a comment at some point about, okay, how would you manage the back end of that, right? Rant number two, and this goes back, Mark, also to your question, as part of the intellectual engineering base of the Navy as CO of Carter-Rock, okay, I was a chief engineer, you all know that. Let me give you some numbers, and someone needs to go fact check me because it's probably 30 years since I've actually looked at the actual numbers. 1988, when we finished the Seawolf contract design, 1,300 seasoned engineers in NAVSEA headquarters that could make very, very good decisions, who had written the specs, who were educated and knew where to take risk and where to say, oh, this is okay, just go do this, right? Set the clock forward to 2002, that workforce went down to 265. The supporting warfare centers in 1988 had 36,000 people. In 2002, they were at 18,000, cut in half, right? Keeping that workforce educated, there was, and this is one I'm not quite sure of, but it was on the order of $100 million a year in early 1990s funds for specification development, maturation, and technology exploration, zeroed in the 1998 budget. Right, so we've worked our way back. There's about 600 people now, but it's all their first time to the rodeo. So that tech base is part of the decision-making chain that approves all of the massive amounts of paper, right? So another comment I'd like to see from you is, how do we improve the velocity of decision-making on technical approval that is stymieing an awful lot of our progress in the shipyards? Question.
We got about 2 minutes left, so.
No, this is a short question. If you could reopen your contracts, which we're all scared to death of every reopening shipbuilding contracts, what would be the first three things you'd add into those contracts to make this go better?
So I can take that. So if we're able to get a thing like saws in place, the first thing we do is increase wages in the shipyard to address shipyard attrition, make sure we're getting the right talent in place. Second thing we'd invest in digital technologies we talked about here. Third thing we'd do is we'd invest in hard capacity.
And that's above what we're already doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Because we'd have the financial wherewithal to do that. And I say that as a company that just acquired the assets, or we announced the acquisition of the assets for W International last week. So we're already making capital investments like that, but it would enable us to do more, which we need to do.
So I don't know about reopening the contract, but I said this to the Navy in a meeting on Monday, so I'll say it here publicly. I said, the next time you do a surface ship contract, right now with the frigate, what you have is the contractor responsible for the functional design, but the government has to approve every artifact, and then we wondered after we set that up why it took way longer than originally estimated, because industry didn't have the capability that we thought we had to do the design, but then on the Navy, they were bottlenecked in bandwidth. There's lots of good people trying to do the right thing to do the due diligence, to do the approval with that reduced size workforce that you talk about. Take the time next time, I said, the next time you do a functional design, get the contractor, get the shipyard out from under it. Do it like we used to do a contract design, have the Navy get the functional design that it wants, and then tell tell the industry, tell the shipbuilder, you take the functional now and turn it into a detailed design and work packages, and you will at least take out the process time of back and forth of trying to get agreement on the functional side. Is this good enough? Is that not good enough? You'll at least go quicker that time. It may cost more. You may not quite get, as much of industry efficiency because it might not be exactly how industry would do it, but you'll get the time out of it.
Eric? 2 words, workforce and technology.
Yeah, amen. All right. Someone write that down.
That's right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. And I want to thank our panelists, Mark Vandroff from Fincantieri Marinette Marine, Eric Snyder from General Dynamics Electric Boat, and Eric Tuning from Huntington Ingalls Industries. So thank you, gentlemen, and we really appreciate being here today.
Yeah, I will just add my thanks to the panel. We thought it was important to get the shipbuilding industry as part of this conference and hear from them. And so we very much appreciate your insights, Mark, Eric, and Eric, and very much appreciate your great job moderating there, Brian. So I knew you'd draw out all the important facts out of this. So this concludes Defense Forum Washington. I told you it was going to be fast and furious, and it was. Some folks I want to thank, first of all, our tremendous speakers that joined us today. You, our audience, both here in person and virtual. Our sponsor, Lockheed Martin, thank you very much for your sponsorship. And I also want to give a shout out to the IT and the audiovisual team that did a great job supporting this, so thank you for that. And also my staff at the Institute, they always do a fabulous job. They hate when I thank them, so all the more reason for me to thank them. And we hope we'll see you in future Naval Institute events in the coming year after Navy takes care of Army this weekend. So thank you again.
At Lockheed Martin, we see things differently because our mission means more than just protecting tomorrow. It's about propelling it forward. So we use the power of data to build powerful connections, utilize AI to bring our technology to the fight, and look for answers in places others would never think of. We see things from a different point of view, but our mission is always clear.